Hello, welcome back to Mr. Bellicho. It's late at night and you're probably alone. Perfect. Today, we're exploring a story from the darkness of rural Oklahoma. A small-town cop discovers something impossible in the woods. Creatures that move too fast, hunt too smart, and worst of all, they're watching through your phone. These aren't mindless monsters. They learn, they adapt, they communicate. And by the time you realize they're real, it might already be too late. Stay with me as we uncover what was really hunting in those woods. Let's begin. There's a point in life where you stop expecting the world to make sense. That point for me came on September 14th, 2003, in Sweeney, Oklahoma, a tiny town where the biggest issue I ever handled was some drunk knocking over a mailbox. Yeah, I'm a small-town cop named Eddie Keeler, and I used to think my job was pretty straightforward. I grew up here, always liked the quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear someone's screen door squeak from a block away. It wasn't a bad life. I had a daughter, Sarah, who I mostly saw on weekends. I used to joke that being a cop here was less about chasing bad guys and more about avoiding my ex-wife at the grocery store. Yeah, it wasn't exciting, but I was fine with that until that day. I was on duty, nothing out of the ordinary, just doing a drive around the outskirts of town. A lot of empty fields, rundown farmhouses, and the occasional pickup truck. You know the type. And then the call came in, crackling over the radio. Sheriff's office, we got a situation near Old Kinley Road. A couple of kids reported a body over. I rolled my eyes, probably some high school prank. Still, I had nothing better to do, so I flipped on the lights and headed over. It didn't take long. Old Kinley Road was a desolate strip of gravel barely fit for a car, lined by barbed wire fences and fields that no one had tended in years. You know those places where even nature gives up? This was one of those. I pulled up and saw the two kids standing by the side of the road looking pale as hell. Teenagers. One of them was holding a BMX bike, the other just fidgeting nervously. "What's going on, boys?" I asked, getting out of the car. The one with the bike pointed. "We found something, just over there in the trees." I followed his gaze to a patch of woods about 50 yards off the road. Now I wasn't too eager to go tromping through the underbrush, but I figured they'd found some dead animal, or at worst, an old vagrant who'd passed out. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the tree line. "Stay here," I told the boys, mostly to make sure they didn't follow me and complicate things. The smell hit me first, like roadkill, but worse, thicker somehow. I pushed through the trees, my flashlight barely cutting through the dimness beneath the canopy. There, tangled in the underbrush, was the body. Now I've seen dead people before. Comes with the job. But this was something different. The corpse was torn apart, limbs scattered, chest ripped open. It wasn't an animal attack. I knew that much right away. Whatever had done this wasn't looking for food. The way the body was shredded, it seemed like it was done out of rage, almost like it was deliberate. I knelt beside what was left of the torso and noticed something even stranger. No blood. At least, not like you'd expect. The ground wasn't soaked, it was dry, save for a few splatters around the area. That's when I noticed the marks on the trees. Deep, claw-like gouges running up the bark much higher than any animal could reach. I stood up, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just me, the mangled body, and the trees. Jesus Christ, I muttered under my breath. I wasn't armed that day. Yeah, dumb, I know, but in Sweeney, you never really needed to be. I fumbled for my radio, trying to keep my hand from shaking. "Dispatch, this is Keeler. I'm at the scene. I hesitated. "We've got a body torn up pretty bad. I need backup now." There was a long pause. The dispatcher didn't say anything for a few seconds, long enough for me to notice the sweat starting to beat on my forehead. "Copy that, Keeler. Sending units. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I could feel my pulse picking up. I needed to get the hell out of those woods. I turned to leave when I heard something, low but distinct, like the snap of a twig, or maybe the scrape of something heavy being dragged. I froze. "Hello?" I called, instantly regretting it. What was I hoping for? A friendly wave? My legs felt like lead as I started backing away. I don't know why I didn't run. Probably that stupid cop instinct. Don't panic, handle the situation. But this wasn't something I was trained to handle. Another snap. Closer this time. I turned and bolted, crashing through the brush like a madman. I didn't care about noise anymore. I just wanted out of there. As I reached the tree line, I glanced over my shoulder and saw it. Just for a second. A shape, hulking, too big to be a man. Its skin, if you could call it that, was rough, like cracked asphalt. The thing moved fast, faster than anything that size should have been able to. I don't think I've ever run so hard in my life. By the time I burst out of the woods and reached my car, I was out of breath. The kids were gone, their bikes abandoned by the side of the road. Smart kids, smarter than me anyway. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped them. I peeled out of there, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped back toward town. "Keeler, what's your status? Keeler, respond." The radio crackled, but I couldn't answer. Not yet. I needed to get away, needed to put some distance between me and whatever the hell was back there. By the time I got back to the station, the other units were already heading toward Old Kinley. I parked, sat in my cruiser for a moment, just trying to catch my breath. I kept replaying it in my head, what I'd seen, what it had done to that body. A few minutes later, Chief Donovan came out. Big guy. Probably spent more time behind a desk than in the field these days. He leaned against my window, looking concerned. "You all right, Eddie? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't laugh. "It wasn't a ghost, Chief. You wouldn't believe me if I told you." He sighed, opening the door and sitting down in the passenger seat. "Try me." So I told him. Everything. The body, the woods, the thing. I could tell by the look on his face he thought I was losing it. Hell, I didn't even believe myself. But I knew what I saw, and no amount of logic or reason was going to make that go away. "All right," Donovan said when I finished. "You've had a long day. Go home, Eddie. Get some rest. I'll take care of things." "Chief, I'm telling you." Yeah, I hear you." He patted my shoulder like I was some old dog that needed to be put down. "We'll look into it." I went home, but I didn't sleep. Not really. My mind kept drifting back to that shape in the woods, the way it moved, like it was tracking me. I'd always felt safe here in Sweeney. Now, I wasn't so sure. The next morning I got a call. They'd found another body. Same spot, same condition. But this time it wasn't a stranger. It was one of the deputies that had gone to check out the scene. And this time, nobody thought I was crazy. I showed up at the station, and there was a tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for someone else to say what they were all thinking. The truth was they didn't want to believe it either. But that second body, there was no explaining that away. Chief Donovan was pacing when I walked in. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. "Eddie, we need to talk," he said, waving me into his office. We sat down, and for the first time I saw real worry in his eyes. "This thing, whatever it is," he began, "it's not an animal. It's not a person. Hell, I don't know what it is, but it's killing people, and it's not going to stop." I nodded, feeling a cold knot of dread in my stomach. "What do we do?" "We need to hunt it down," Donovan said, though he didn't sound too confident, "before it gets any closer to town." I should have said no, should have told him to call in the state boys, let them deal with it. But I didn't. I was a cop. This was my town, and I wasn't about to let some monster tear it apart. But before we went charging back into those woods, I needed to know what we were up against. I needed information. "Give me a few hours, Chief," I said. "I want to look into this." Donovan looked skeptical but nodded. "Fine, we'll head out tonight. But Eddie, be careful who you talk to about this. People get spooked easily." I nodded and left his office, heading straight for the small computer terminal we had in the corner of the station. I wasn't much for technology, but I knew enough to get by. I typed "Animal Attacks Oklahoma" into the search bar, but nothing useful came up. Just the usual stories about cougars and the occasional bear. I tried "unexplained deaths" next, and that's when things got interesting. There was a forum, some kind of message board where people posted stories about weird shit they'd experienced. Most of it was obvious BS, but one thread caught my eye. "Something is hunting in the woods. The post was from someone calling themselves Woods Watcher, dated just 6 months ago. They described finding a body in the forests near a small town in Arkansas, not far from the Oklahoma border. The details matched what I'd seen: mutilated corpse, no blood, claw marks on trees. But what really got me was the description of what they'd seen lurking in the woods. A large humanoid creature with skin like cracked asphalt, moving unnaturally fast. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just happening here. I scrolled through the comments, most people dismissing it as fiction or a hoax. But a few seemed genuinely concerned, sharing similar stories from other small towns across the region. One user, TruthSeeker88, had compiled a list of similar incidents dating back to the 1970s. I clicked on their profile and found a rabbit hole of research. They'd been tracking these incidents for years, posting detailed analyses and maps showing a pattern of attacks moving slowly westward across the country. According to their timeline, the attacks happened in clusters, 3 or 4 in quick succession, and then nothing for months or even years. I jotted down what I could: names of towns, dates, descriptions. There wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. I was about to log off when a private message popped up on the screen. "Officer Keeler, I see you've been looking at my posts." My heart skipped a beat. How the hell did they know who I was? I hadn't registered, hadn't given my name. "Who is this?" I typed back. "Someone who knows what you're dealing with. The thing in your woods, it's been around a long time. Longer than you'd believe." "What is it?" There was a long pause before the response came through. "We don't know, but we do know it feeds on fear as much as flesh, and it's not alone." "We? Who's we?" "People who've encountered these things and lived. We call ourselves the Watchers. We track them, study them, try to warn people when we can." "How do I kill it?" Another pause. "Conventional weapons can hurt it, but not easily. Fire works better. But be careful, Officer Keeler. These things are smarter than they look, and they learn." "How do you know my name?" "IP tracking. I have skills. Look, I can't talk long. They find ways to listen. Check your email. I've sent you what I can. Good luck." The message window closed, and no matter what I tried, I couldn't get it back. I checked my email on the ancient desktop and found a new message from an anonymous address. The subject line read simply, "They hunt at night." The email contained dozens of links to news articles, forum posts, and a few scanned pages from old books. Stories of creatures stalking small towns, of mutilated bodies found in the woods, dating back centuries. Different descriptions in different places, but always the same pattern. Isolated communities, bodies torn apart, strange marks on trees. One image made my stomach turn. A photo from 1978, grainy and dark, but clear enough to see a massive, shadowy figure standing at the edge of a forest. Its proportions were all wrong, limbs too long, head too small, and its skin, even in the poor quality photo, I could see the cracked, almost charred texture. I printed what I could and shoved it all into a folder. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was anger. This thing, whatever it was, had been killing people for years, maybe decades, and no one had done a damn thing about it. When I got back to Donovan's office, he was on the phone, his expression grim. He hung up as I walked in. "We've got another problem," he said. "Those kids who found the body, they're missing. Parents haven't seen them since yesterday." My heart sank. "You think the thing got them?" Donovan shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe they got scared and ran off. Either way, we need to find them." He nodded to the folder in my hands. "What's that?" I laid it out on his desk, showing him the articles, the forum posts, the photos. "This isn't the first time this has happened, Chief. These things, they've been around for a while, and according to this, they hunt at night." Donovan flipped through the pages, his face growing more serious with each one. "Jesus, Eddie, you really think all this is connected?" "I do, and there's more." I told him about the message, about the Watchers, about what they'd told me. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with his hands. "So we're dealing with some kind of, what, monster? That's been killing people across the country for years?" "Looks that way. and conventional weapons might not be enough? That's what they said. Donovan stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. Sweeney was quiet today, like the town knew something was wrong. All right, he said finally. We gather up some men, we load up with everything we've got, and we go hunting. Tonight. Chief, maybe we should call in some help. State police, FBI, someone with more resources. Donovan turned to look at me, his eyes hard. And tell them what, Eddie? That we're hunting a monster? They'll laugh us out of town. No, this is our problem. We handle it ourselves. I nodded, knowing he was right. No one from outside would believe us. Hell, I was still having trouble believing it myself. One more thing, I said. According to what I found, these things, they're not alone. There might be more of them. Donovan's jaw tightened. Then we better make sure we get them all. We gathered up a small team, just 4 of us, me, Donovan, and 2 other deputies, Blake and Marlin. We were all armed this time, shotguns mostly. I had an old hunting rifle slung over my shoulder, and in my pack was a makeshift flamethrower I'd put together from a propane torch and some other hardware store items. If fire worked better, I wanted to be prepared. We drove back out to Old Kinley Road, parked by the tree line, and geared up. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. It would be dark soon. All right, stay close, Donovan said. And for God's sake, keep your eyes open. We moved into the woods, forming a loose line. The smell hit me again as we pushed deeper into the woods. The same rancid metallic stench of decay hung in the air, even stronger now. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to focus. I wasn't going to let fear get the better of me. The trees closed in, their thick branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the light. Blake was up ahead, Marlin on my left, and Donovan brought up the rear. We moved slowly, deliberately. The only sound the crunch of leaves under our boots. Keeler, you seeing anything? Donovan's voice crackled over the radio. Nothing yet, I whispered back. But I could feel it, like eyes on the back of my neck. The same sensation I had the day before. That thing was close. I could sense it. In the growing darkness, I switched on the flashlight mounted to my rifle, sweeping it across the trees. The claw marks were everywhere now, deep gouges in the bark that seemed to lead deeper into the woods. Look, I said, pointing to the marks. It's like a trail. Or a trap, Marlin muttered, but he followed as we pushed forward. The forest grew denser, the trees packed so tight it was hard to move between them. The air was thick, heavy with moisture and that awful smell. My shirt was sticking to my back with sweat, and not just from the humidity. Suddenly Marlin let out a yelp, followed by the unmistakable sound of something crashing through the brush. We all froze. Marlin, report! Donovan barked, but there was no response. We rushed toward the sound, pushing through the dense foliage. My heart was hammering in my chest as I rounded a thick oak and saw Marlin's shotgun lying on the ground, bent in half like a cheap piece of plastic. There was no sign of him. Just the same deep gouges in the tree trunks, like the ones I'd seen before. My stomach dropped. Blake knelt by the shotgun, his face pale. What the hell could do this? I didn't have an answer. Donovan grabbed Blake by the shoulder and pulled him up. Stay together, he growled. We're not splitting up. We find Marlin. We kill whatever did this. But even Donovan didn't sound too sure anymore. We pushed on, more cautious now. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees became, and soon we were in near darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the forest floor. Every snap of a twig made my nerves jolt. My finger was tight on the trigger, ready for anything. And then we heard it, a low, guttural sound, not like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't human. It was deep, almost like a rumble, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. Blake took a step back, his eyes wide. We need to get out of here, man, he whispered, panic creeping into his voice. I wanted to agree, but before I could say anything, the trees ahead of us exploded with movement. Something huge barreled through the underbrush, faster than anything that size had a right to be. I barely had time to raise my rifle before it was on top of us. Blake fired, but the thing was too quick. It slammed into him, sending him flying into a tree with a sickening crack. He didn't get back up. Jesus! Donovan shouted, unloading his shotgun into the creature. The thing barely flinched. I caught a glimpse of it in the beam of my flashlight, a hulking mass of cracked, blackened skin like it had crawled out of a pit of tar. Its limbs were too long, its movements unnaturally fast and jerky like it didn't belong in this world. I fired my rifle, the shot echoing through the woods. The bullet hit, but the thing barely slowed down. It turned toward me, and in that moment, I knew I was dead. But then, out of nowhere, Marlon's voice rang out. "Over here!" He yelled from behind the thing, waving his arms like a maniac. The creature hesitated, its head snapping toward him. Donovan and I didn't waste the distraction. We opened fire, both of us unloading everything we had into the creature. The bullets seemed to finally find their mark, black ichor spurting from its wounds. As it staggered, I dropped my rifle and pulled out the makeshift flamethrower. "Fire!" I shouted to Donovan. "The guy online said fire works better." I didn't wait for a response. I ignited the torch and sent a stream of flame toward the creature. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The thing let out a shriek that seemed to pierce right through my skull, a sound so unearthly it felt like it was coming from somewhere else entirely. Its skin bubbled and popped, the flames catching like it was soaked in gasoline. The creature thrashed wildly, its limbs flailing as it tried to escape the fire. But we didn't let up. Donovan had produced a flare gun from somewhere and fired it directly at the thing's face. The forest lit up with an eerie red glow as the flare embedded itself in what might have been the creature's head. It stumbled, its movements becoming more erratic, before finally collapsing onto the ground with a heavy thud. We stood there for a moment, breathing hard, weapons still raised, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. It just lay there, a dark, twisted heap in the dirt, flames still licking at its body. Marlon came over, limping slightly, but alive. "Holy hell," he muttered, looking at the thing on the ground. "What the hell is that?" I shook my head, still trying to process what had just happened. "I don't know." Donovan, panting and covered in sweat, walked up to the creature and nudged it with his boot. It didn't move. "Whatever it is, it's dead now," he said. But there was no relief in his voice. He was just as rattled as the rest of us. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the body of the thing. Its skin was cracked and charred, like it had been burned from the inside out. I didn't want to get any closer, but curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down and looked at its face, or what was left of it. Its mouth was too wide, its teeth jagged and uneven, and its hands, if you could call them that, were long and clawed, like something out of a nightmare. "Do you think there's more of them?" Marlon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. But one thing was for sure. Whatever this thing was, it didn't belong here. As we prepared to leave, I noticed something strange. Clutched in one of the creature's hands was a small metallic object. I pried it loose, careful not to touch the thing's skin. It was a phone, a newer model smartphone, cracked but still functioning. And on the screen was a message thread. The text still visible. "It's watching me. I can feel it. Don't come looking for me." The message was from one of the missing teenagers, and it was sent just hours before we arrived. We loaded Blake's body into the back of the cruiser, the weight of it a reminder of how real this all was. I radioed for backup again, my voice steadier now, but my mind was still racing. By the time we got back to town, the sun was starting to rise. The early morning light didn't do much to erase the horrors of the night. Donovan pulled me aside as we walked into the station, his face set in a grim line. "This stays between us, Eddie. No one's going to believe what happened out there. Not the state boys, not anyone." I nodded, too tired to argue. He was right. We couldn't explain what we'd seen. Hell, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "What about Blake?" I asked. Donovan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We'll come up with something. Animal attack, something people can swallow." "And the creature?" "We'll bury it," he said, his voice low. "Somewhere deep." I didn't argue. There wasn't much left to say. But I had the phone, and I needed answers. I took it home with me, careful not to show it to anyone at the station. It was evidence, sure, but evidence of what? No one would believe me if I told them the truth. Once I was alone, I examined the phone more carefully. The battery was almost dead, but there was enough juice left to scroll through it. The kid's name was Jason Miller, one of the teenagers who'd found the first body. His text history was mostly typical teenage stuff, but in the last few days, there were dozens of messages about the thing in the woods. He and his friend Tommy had been tracking it. They'd seen it multiple times before they found the body. They'd even taken photos. I scrolled through the camera roll, my hands shaking. Most of the photos were too dark or blurry to make out anything, but a few showed a dark shape moving between trees, those same claw marks visible on the trunks. But it was the browser history that really caught my attention. Jason had been researching the creature just like I had. He'd visited the same forums, read the same posts. But he'd gone deeper, much deeper. One site in particular, blackwoodresearch.net, seemed to be his main source. I grabbed my laptop and typed in the URL. The site looked old, the design straight out of the early 2000s. The header read, "Documenting the unexplained, from sightings to science." I clicked through the pages, reading articles about unexplained phenomena, cryptids, and strange occurrences across the country. Most of it seemed like typical paranormal enthusiast stuff, but one section stood out, the hollow ones. The article described creatures that matched what we'd seen in the woods. Humanoid but not human, with charred, cracked skin, unnaturally fast movements, and a preference for isolated communities. According to the site, they'd been documented for centuries, though under different names in different cultures. The article was detailed, scientific almost, with footnotes and references to historical documents, eyewitness accounts, and even a few blurry photographs. It described the creatures' behaviors, their hunting patterns, their apparent ability to hide in plain sight. But what really chilled me was the section titled Communication. According to Blackwood Research, these creatures, these hollow ones, weren't just monsters. They were intelligent. They could learn, adapt, and even use technology. There were documented cases of them using phones, computers, even creating online profiles to lure victims or track those who hunted them. The article included screenshots of forum posts supposedly made by the creatures, messages that seemed normal at first glance but contained subtle threats or impossible knowledge about the recipients. And some of those screenshots looked eerily familiar. I scrolled back through Jason's phone, looking at the messages he'd received in the days before his disappearance. Most were from Tommy or other friends, but a few were from unknown numbers with strange cryptic texts. "I see you in the woods. Your fear smells sweet. We've been waiting for someone like you." And the most recent, sent just before his last message, "The trees have eyes. We're watching." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. If what Blackwood Research claimed was true, then these creatures weren't just hunting in our woods. They were watching us, learning about us, using our own technology against us. I dug deeper into the site, finding a forum where people shared their encounters with the hollow ones. The stories were terrifying but consistent. Small towns, isolated communities, people disappearing, bodies found mutilated, if they were found at all. And always the same description of the creatures. One thread caught my eye. They're spreading west. The original post was from 3 years ago, describing sightings across Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma. The pattern matched what Truthseeker88 had shown on the other forum, but it was the most recent reply that made my blood run cold. Posted just 2 days ago. They're in Sweeney now. God help them. The username was Woodswatcher, the same one from the other forum. I clicked on their profile and found a history of posts tracking the creature's movements. According to their research, the hollow ones moved in groups of 3 to 5, establishing territories before moving on. They'd been working their way west for decades, leaving a trail of missing persons and unexplained deaths in their wake. Woodswatcher's latest post included a detailed map of their movements, with Sweeney marked as active territory. And next to it, in bold red text, multiple entities confirmed, multiple entities. That meant the one we'd killed wasn't alone. There were more out there. I was about to contact Woodswatcher when my phone rang. It was Donovan. "Eddie, we've got a problem. That thing we killed, it's gone." My heart sank. "What do you mean, gone? We killed it." "The body. It's not there anymore. We went back to bury it properly and the damn thing was gone. Just a burned patch on the ground where it was lying." "Could someone have moved it?" "Who?" "Nobody knew it was there except us." "And Eddie, we found more tracks. Different ones. Smaller. Like there's more than one of these things out there." I closed my eyes, the weight of what I'd discovered pressing down on me. I know, Chief. I've been doing some research. The thing we killed, it's called a hollow one. And according to what I've found, they hunt in groups. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Donovan spoke again, his voice was low, determined. How many? 3 to 5, typically. So if we killed one, there could be 4 more out there. And Chief, there's something else. These things, they're smart. They use technology, phones, computers. They might even be watching us online. Another pause. Jesus, Eddie. You're telling me these monsters can use phones? That's what the research suggests. And I found a phone on the one we killed. It belonged to one of the missing kids, Jason Miller. He'd been researching them too before he disappeared. All right. We need to regroup, figure out our next move. Meet me at the station in an hour. I hung up, my mind racing. If the hollow ones were as intelligent as Blackwood research claimed, they might already know we were onto them. They might be planning their next move. I looked back at the phone in my hand, at the messages from unknown numbers. Were they watching me now? Had they been watching all along? A new message popped up on the screen, from a number I didn't recognize. See you soon, Officer Keeler. I nearly dropped the phone. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was pure, cold fear. They knew my name. They knew I had the phone. They were watching. I grabbed my gun and checked the windows, half expecting to see one of those things staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty street outside my house. I needed to get to the station, to warn Donovan and the others. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, the phone still clutched in my hand. As I reached for the doorknob, another message came through. We're closer than you think. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Were they outside? Waiting for me? I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. If they were outside, I couldn't just walk out there. But I couldn't stay here either. I moved to the window, carefully peering out through the blinds. The street was empty, no sign of movement, but that didn't mean anything. These things were fast and they could hide. Another text. Look up. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I raised my gaze to the ceiling. Nothing, but the message was clear. They weren't just outside. They were everywhere. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. That's what they wanted. According to Blackwood research, the hollow ones fed on fear as much as flesh. I needed to get to Donovan, to tell him what I'd learned. We needed to warn the town, to get people to safety. But how? I looked at the phone again, an idea forming. If they could use technology, so could I. I opened the browser on my laptop and went back to Blackwood research. There had to be more information, something I'd missed. I scanned through the articles again, looking for weaknesses, for ways to fight these things, and there it was, in a section titled Vulnerabilities. According to the site, the hollow ones had several weaknesses. Fire was one, as we'd already discovered. But there were others. They couldn't cross running water. They were sensitive to certain frequencies of sound. And most importantly, they couldn't predict human behavior that didn't stem from fear. The article explained that the hollow ones had evolved to track and hunt frightened prey. They could sense fear, follow it, predict what a scared human would do. But when humans acted without fear or against their instincts, the creatures became confused, disoriented. That's why Marlin had survived. He hadn't run. He'd stood his ground, shouted, drawn attention to himself, the exact opposite of what a terrified person would do. I grabbed my phone, my real phone, not Jason's, and called Donovan. Chief, it's Eddie. Don't go to the station. I think they're watching it. What? Who's watching it? The hollow ones. I've been doing more research. They're hunting us, Chief, and they're using our fear against us. I explained what I'd found, about their weaknesses, about how they tracked fear. Donovan listened in silence, and when I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. So what's the plan, Eddie? We need to warn people, get them somewhere safe. According to what I've found, these things avoid large groups. They prefer isolated targets. The school, Donovan said. It's big, it's central. We can gather people there. Good idea. But we need to be careful how we spread the word. If these things are monitoring phones, internet, I'll send officers door to door, quietly, no sirens, no panic, just tell people there's a dangerous animal in the area and we're gathering at the school as a precaution. All right. And Chief, we need weapons. Fire, mostly, and something loud, speakers or sirens. They're sensitive to certain frequencies. I'll handle it. You get to the school. I'll meet you there. I hung up, feeling a little calmer now that we had a plan. I checked Jason's phone again. No new messages. But that didn't mean they weren't watching. I gathered what I needed, my gun, a makeshift flamethrower similar to the one I'd used in the woods, and a portable radio I'd modified to emit a high-pitched frequency. According to Blackwood research, anything above 20,000 hertz would disorient them. As I prepared to leave, one last message came through on Jason's phone. Running won't save you. We're already here. I steeled myself, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The street was still empty, but I could feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows. I walked to my car, forcing myself to move slowly, calmly. No fear. That's what they wanted. The drive to the school was tense, every shadow seeming to move, every tree potentially hiding one of those things, but I made it without incident. The school parking lot was already filling up with cars as people arrived, confused but following instructions. Donovan was at the entrance, directing people inside. He looked relieved when he saw me. "Glad you made it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We've got about half the town here already. Rest should be arriving soon. Any sign of them?" He shook his head. "Nothing yet, but we've set up patrols around the perimeter. Armed men, working in groups of 3 or 4. No one goes anywhere alone." I nodded, impressed with how quickly he'd organized everything. "What about weapons?" "Got a stockpile inside. Flare guns, makeshift flamethrowers like you suggested. And Bill from the hardware store rigged up some kind of sonic device. Says it should emit the frequency you mentioned." We headed inside. The school gymnasium had been transformed into a makeshift command center, with tables set up for weapons, communication equipment, and a large map of Sweeney and the surrounding woods. People were milling about, some confused, some frightened, but most just waiting for instructions. Donovan had done a good job keeping panic to a minimum. "All right, listen up," Donovan called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "We've got a dangerous situation in town, some kind of predator in the woods. We've already lost Deputy Blake, and we've got reason to believe these things are hunting more victims." He didn't mention what these things really were. I didn't blame him. People would have a hard time believing the truth. "We're going to stay here tonight, all of us together. Safety in numbers. In the morning, we'll organize search parties to track down and eliminate the threat." There were murmurs of agreement, a few questions about the animal we were hunting, but overall people seemed to accept the situation. This was a town where people hunted, where they respected the dangers of the wild. The idea of a predator wasn't so far-fetched. As night fell, we set up watches, groups of 4 patrolling the perimeter of the school. I volunteered for the first shift, along with Marlin and 2 other deputies. We were armed with shotguns, flare guns, and the sonic devices Bill had rigged up. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. No crickets, no night birds. Just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. We patrolled in silence, eyes scanning the darkness, ears straining for any unusual sound. It was around midnight when we heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from the trees across the street from the school. We froze, raising our weapons, eyes straining to see in the darkness. "There," Marlin whispered, pointing to a spot between 2 trees. I saw it a moment later, a dark shape, larger than a man, moving with that same unnatural speed we'd seen in the woods. And then another, and another. 3 of them, moving towards us. "Get ready," I muttered, raising my flamethrower. "When they get closer, hit them with everything we've got." The shapes moved closer, their movements jerky and unsettling. I could make out more details now, the cracked, charred skin, the 2 long limbs, the small, almost sunken heads. "Now!" I shouted. We opened fire, shotguns blasting, flares streaking through the air, the sonic devices emitting a high-pitched wail that made my ears hurt even at the lower range of their output. The effect was immediate. The creatures staggered, their movements becoming erratic. One of the flares hit its mark, and one of the hollow ones erupted in flames, its scream cutting through the night. But the other two kept coming, moving faster now, driven by rage or hunger or both. They were on us before we could reload, their clawed hands slashing through the air. I triggered my flamethrower, sending a stream of fire into the face of the nearest creature. It reeled back, shrieking, but didn't fall. These ones seemed stronger, more resistant to fire than the one we'd killed in the woods. Marlin was grappling with the third creature, trying to keep its claws away from his face. I turned to help him, swinging my emptied flamethrower like a club. It connected with the creature's head, sending it stumbling back. "The sonic device!" I shouted to Marlin. "Use it!" He fumbled for the device at his belt, his hands shaking. The creature was recovering, moving towards him again. I stepped between them, facing the thing down. "Over here, you ugly bastard," I called, waving my arms. The creature hesitated, its head tilting in an almost curious manner. It wasn't used to prey that didn't run, that didn't cower in fear. It was confused, just like Blackwood Research had said. Marlin got the device activated and a high-pitched wail cut through the air. The effect on the creatures was dramatic. They clutched at what might have been ears, their movements becoming erratic, pained. "The flamethrowers!" I shouted. "Now!" We unleashed fire on the disoriented creatures, streams of flame catching on their cracked skin. They thrashed and shrieked, trying to escape, but we didn't let up. The flames grew higher, consuming them, until all that was left were 3 burning heaps on the ground. But we'd learned our lesson from the first one. We kept the fire going, adding fuel from our packs, making sure they burned completely. No coming back this time. By morning, there was nothing left but ashes. We gathered them, put them in metal containers, and Donovan arranged for them to be buried in concrete, deep beneath the town's new water treatment plant. The official story was a pack of feral dogs, driven mad by disease. People accepted it. It was easier to believe than the truth. In the weeks that followed, we kept up the patrols, kept monitoring the woods, but there were no more sightings, no more attacks. Life in Sweeney slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after what we'd seen. I kept in touch with Woods Watcher and the others on the forums, sharing what we'd learned, helping them track these things across the country. If the hollow ones were real, there had to be more of them out there, and someone needed to be ready. As for me, I still patrol the outskirts of town, still listen for that unnatural silence in the woods. And every night before I go to bed, I check my phone for messages from unknown numbers, half expecting to see those words again. We're watching. Because deep down, I know the truth. What happened in Sweeney wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between towns, in the shadows of the forest, they're waiting, watching, learning. And someday, they'll be back. The map spread across my lap fluttered in the breeze as our rented SUV bumped along the unpaved Forest Service road. Towering pines pressed in from both sides, their shadows dancing across the windshield as sunshine filtered through the canopy above. We were 3 days into our cross-country adventure, having left the crowded streets of Seattle behind for the remote wilderness of northern Idaho. "How much farther to this magical cabin of yours, Coda?" asked Jasper from the back seat, his Australian accent thickening with fatigue. He'd been my roommate during a study abroad program years ago, and when I mentioned this trip, he immediately booked a flight from Melbourne. Coda glanced at me from behind the wheel, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "According to our navigator here, we should be about 20 minutes out." Born and raised in Vancouver, Coda had been my hiking buddy for years, crossing the border whenever we planned an adventure. He'd found the cabin online, a remote rental property on the edge of a pristine lake, miles from civilization. "Better be worth the trek," said Naomi, Jasper's girlfriend, as she peered through the window at the increasingly dense forest. "I've never seen trees this tall before." "They call this area Atasaya's Domain," I said, recalling the information from the cabin listing. "It's an old name from local indigenous folklore." "What does it mean?" Jasper asked, leaning forward between the front seats. "The listing didn't say," I replied. "Just mentioned it was tied to local legends." "Probably a marketing gimmick," Coda said with a shrug. "Make the place seem mysterious." The SUV rattled over a particularly rough patch of road, and I gripped the dashboard. "Take it easy. If we blow a tire out here, we're screwed." We continued in silence for several minutes before the trees suddenly parted, revealing a glittering expanse of water. The lake stretched before us, its surface reflecting the afternoon sun like polished glass. On the far shore, mountains rose dramatically, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "Now that," Jasper whispered, "is worth the drive." The cabin appeared around the next bend, a two-story structure of weathered logs with a wide porch facing the water. It looked rustic, but well-maintained, exactly as advertised. Coda parked beside it, and we tumbled out, stretching our legs after the long drive. "Check this place out," Naomi said, already heading toward the porch. "It's perfect." The interior was spacious and surprisingly modern, with a fully equipped kitchen, comfortable furniture, and large windows overlooking the lake. Upstairs, 4 bedrooms provided ample space for our group. After claiming rooms and unpacking, we gathered on the porch with beers, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. "To adventure," Coda said, raising his bottle. We clinked bottles and drank, but something about the forest beyond the clearing made the hair on my neck stand up. As shadows lengthened across the ground, the woods seemed to darken too quickly, too completely. "What's the plan for tomorrow?" Jasper asked, breaking my uneasy reverie. "There's a trail that circles the lake," I said, pulling out a trail map I'd printed before leaving Seattle. "About 15 miles total. Should take us most of the day with stops." "Perfect," Naomi said. "I want to take tons of photos." As night fell completely, we moved inside. Coda built a fire in the stone fireplace while I prepared a simple dinner. The conversation flowed easily, old friends catching up and making plans for the days ahead. But every so often I found myself glancing toward the windows, where our reflection stood stark against the darkness outside. Later, as we were cleaning up, Naomi paused, head tilted. "Did you guys hear that?" We all went silent, listening. From somewhere in the darkness came a sound, not quite a howl, not quite a scream. Something between the two, rising and falling on the night air. "Coyote," Coda said dismissively. "They make weird noises." "That didn't sound like any coyote I've ever heard," I replied, moving to the window. The glass reflected only our concerned faces and the warm light of the cabin. Beyond was absolute darkness. "Whatever it was, it's far away," Jasper said, though he didn't sound convinced. When we finally retired to our rooms, I found myself unable to settle. My window faced the forest, and as I prepared for bed, I noticed something, a flicker of movement between the trees. I stepped closer to the glass, straining to see in the darkness. There, at the forest's edge, a figure stood motionless, too tall and thin to be human, yet standing upright like a man. For a moment I convinced myself it was just a tree trunk seen from an odd angle. Then it moved, gliding sideways without seeming to take steps, disappearing behind a massive pine. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. Sleep came much later, and when it did, my dreams were filled with strange sounds and distorted shapes moving just beyond my field of vision. Morning arrived with golden sunshine and the cheerful calls of birds, making the previous night's unease seem foolish. Over breakfast, I considered mentioning what I'd seen, but decided against it. No need to start our adventure with ghost stories. "Perfect day for hiking," Coda announced, checking the weather on his phone. "Not too hot, clear skies." We packed day packs with water, lunch, and emergency supplies. Just before leaving, I noticed a carving beside the front door that I'd missed the day before, a stylized figure with an elongated head and unnaturally long limbs. "What's this supposed to be?" I asked the others. Naomi examined it closely. "Looks old. Maybe it's related to that Atasaya name you mentioned." "Creepy-looking fella," Jasper commented. "Local mascot, maybe?" Coda was already heading down the steps. "Come on, daylight's wasting." As we set off down the trail that would take us around the lake, I glanced back at the cabin once more. The carving seemed to watch us go, its crude features somehow expressing hunger. I hurried to catch up with my friends, pushing the thought from my mind as we ventured deeper into the wilderness. The hiking trail started pleasantly enough, a well-maintained path winding along the lakeshore, occasionally dipping into the forest before emerging again with spectacular views of the water. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, and the air was rich with the scent of pine and earth. By mid-morning, we'd made good progress, stopping frequently for Naomi to photograph particularly striking vistas. "This place is unreal," she said, adjusting her camera settings to capture a bald eagle soaring above the lake. "I could spend weeks here just taking pictures." "Glad you're enjoying it," I replied, consulting our map. "We should reach the halfway point in about 2 hours. There's supposed to be a waterfall and a good spot for lunch." Coda, who had taken the lead, suddenly stopped and crouched down, examining something on the trail. As we caught up, I saw what had caught his attention: unusual tracks pressed into the soft earth. "What kind of animal made those?" Jasper asked, peering over Coda's shoulder. The tracks were perplexing, larger than a human footprint but shaped all wrong. They appeared to have been made by something walking on 2 legs, but the impressions were elongated and ended in what looked like sharp points rather than toes. "Not sure," Coda admitted, his typically confident expression faltering. "Maybe a bear walking funny? Or a deer that dragged its hooves?" I studied the tracks more closely. They didn't look like any animal sign I'd encountered in my years of hiking the Pacific Northwest. More disturbing was how they seemed to appear suddenly on the trail, as if whatever made them had dropped from above. "Let's keep moving," I suggested, unable to shake a growing sense of unease. Probably just some weird erosion pattern. We continued hiking, but the easy conversation that had carried us through the morning gradually died away. I found myself scanning the forest more intently, attuned to every sound and movement. Twice I thought I glimpsed something moving parallel to our path, just beyond the trees, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. About an hour later, the trail narrowed as it led us away from the lake and deeper into the forest. The trees grew more dense here, blocking much of the sunlight and creating a perpetual twilight beneath their branches. Moss hung from the trunks, and the undergrowth became thicker, sometimes encroaching on the path. "Is it just me, or did it get really quiet?" Naomi asked, glancing around nervously. She was right. The forest had fallen silent. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the breeze seemed to have died away, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. "Probably just the time of day," Coda offered, though he didn't sound convinced. "Animals rest during midday heat." "It's not that hot," Jasper pointed out, "and there's hardly any sun getting through these trees." We pressed on, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The trail began to climb, becoming steeper and rockier. I checked the map again, confirming we were still on the right path, though it seemed different from the description I'd read online. "We should be coming up on that waterfall soon," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Instead, we emerged into a small clearing where the trail seemed to vanish completely. Confused, I turned in a circle, looking for where the path continued. "This can't be right," I muttered, consulting the map again. "The trail should go straight through here." "Maybe we took a wrong turn," Jasper suggested. "There weren't any junctions," Coda said, frowning. "We've been on the same path the whole time." Naomi wandered to the edge of the clearing, peering into the trees. "Guys," she called, her voice tight with tension. "You need to see this." We joined her at the clearing's edge. There, hanging from the branches of several trees, were crude figures made of twisted branches and animal bones. They swayed slightly, though there was no breeze to move them. "What the hell are those?" Jasper whispered. "Trail markers?" Coda suggested weakly. "No way," I said, stepping closer to examine one of the figures. It was roughly humanoid, but with disproportionately long limbs and a head fashioned from what appeared to be a small animal skull. These looked like warning signs. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest beyond, and we all froze. I scanned the trees but saw only shadows and dense undergrowth. "I think we should go back," Naomi said, clutching her camera like a talisman. "This doesn't feel right." I was inclined to agree, but as I turned to retrace our steps, I realized with a sinking feeling that I couldn't identify the trail we'd arrived on. The clearing now seemed to have multiple paths leading away from it, all identical. "Which way did we come from?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. Coda pointed confidently to a gap in the trees. "That way. I remember that fallen log." But Jasper shook his head. "No, we came from over there. See the broken branch? We passed that just before entering the clearing." They were pointing in completely different directions. I looked to Naomi, who just shrugged helplessly. "Let me check the GPS," I said, pulling out my phone. "No signal." The map app showed only our approximate location, with no trails marked nearby. This doesn't make sense. We can't be that far off the main trail. Let's just pick a direction and stick to it, Coda suggested. If we head west, we'll eventually hit the lake, and we can follow the shore back to the cabin. It seemed like our best option. I checked my compass, identified west, and we set off in that direction. The forest grew denser as we walked, the ground becoming increasingly uneven and difficult to traverse. After about 20 minutes of pushing through undergrowth, we should have reached the lake, but there was no sign of water, only more trees stretching endlessly ahead. We need to stop and think, I said, trying to control my growing fear. This isn't working. We gathered in a small space between massive tree trunks. The forest canopy had become so thick that little daylight penetrated, casting everything in a gloomy half-light despite it being early afternoon. Could we climb a tree? Jasper suggested. Get a better view of where we are? Coda nodded and began assessing the nearest trees for climbable branches. As he searched, I noticed Naomi had gone very still, her gaze fixed on something behind me. What is it? I asked, turning to follow her line of sight. At first, I saw nothing. Then, between two distant trees, a figure stepped into view. Tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It stood motionless, partially hidden by a pine trunk, but I could make out its head, elongated and appearing to end in a pointed snout or beak. Do you see that? Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded slowly, afraid that any sudden movement might draw its attention. Coda, Jasper, I called softly. Don't make any quick movements, but look over there. They turned carefully. The figure remained still, watching us from the distance. Is that a person? Jasper asked, squinting. No person looks like that, Coda replied, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. As if responding to our attention, the figure suddenly moved, not walking, but seeming to glide sideways behind a tree, disappearing from view. We stood frozen, waiting for it to reappear, but the forest remained still. We need to get out of here, I said, the words catching in my throat. Now. Which way? Naomi asked, her eyes darting between the trees. Before anyone could answer, a sound cut through the forest, that same, not quite howl from the previous night, but much closer now. It was followed by another, then another, coming from different directions around us. They're surrounding us, Jasper said, backing toward the center of our small group. Run, Coda commanded, grabbing Naomi's arm. Just run. We bolted in the only direction that wasn't producing those terrible sounds, crashing through undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces and arms. I had no idea if we were heading toward safety or deeper into danger, but primal fear drove us forward. Behind us, the howls changed to something worse, a sound like laughter, but distorted and inhuman. And with it came the unmistakable noise of pursuit, branches breaking, leaf litter crunching under heavy footfalls that moved too quickly through the dense forest. Whatever was behind us was gaining ground. We ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at our clothes and skin, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The pursuit continued relentlessly, sometimes seeming to fade into the distance, only to suddenly sound from directly beside us or ahead on our path. It was as though our pursuers knew the forest intimately and were toying with us, herding us in a specific direction. There, Coda shouted suddenly, pointing ahead. I see light. Through the trees, a brightness gleamed, sunlight reflecting off water. We changed course slightly, pushing toward it with renewed desperation. Moments later, we burst from the tree line onto the rocky shore of the lake. But it wasn't the section near our cabin. The far shore looked completely different from what we'd seen before. Where are we? Naomi gasped, bending over to catch her breath. I spun around, trying to get my bearings. The shoreline curved away in both directions, disappearing around rocky points. No sign of the cabin or any human structure. We must be on the opposite side of the lake from the cabin, I reasoned, though I had no real idea if that was true. The lake seemed larger than it had appeared from our starting point. At least we found the lake, Jasper said, scanning the tree line behind us. We can follow the shore until we reach the cabin. Which direction? Coda asked, looking both ways along the shoreline. I checked my compass, trying to remember the orientation of the lake from our maps. If we go right, we should eventually circle back to our side. We moved quickly along the shore, staying close to the water's edge and as far from the trees as possible. The terrain was challenging. Large boulders and fallen trees frequently blocked our path, forcing us to either climb over or detour dangerously close to the forest. After about 30 minutes of this difficult progress, Jasper stopped abruptly. "Look," he said, pointing to the ground. There, in a patch of mud between rocks, were those same strange footprints we'd seen on the trail. They emerged from the water and led directly into the forest. "It can swim," Naomi whispered, her face pale. "We don't know that's the same thing that was chasing us," Coda said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We need to keep moving," I urged. "If we can reach the cabin before dark, we can drive out tonight." The mention of darkness spurred us on. None of us wanted to be caught outside when night fell. We increased our pace, scrambling over obstacles with reckless speed. The afternoon sun was already sliding toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the lake. After another hour of relentless hiking, I spotted something through the trees ahead, a structure of some kind. "Look," I pointed. "Could that be the cabin?" We hurried forward, hope renewing our energy. But as we drew closer, my heart sank. It wasn't our rental cabin, but a much older, smaller structure. A hunter's blind or storage shed, long abandoned. Its wooden walls were weathered gray, windows broken or boarded over, roof partially collapsed. "Should we check inside?" Jasper asked. "Might be something useful." "I don't think," I began, but Coda was already approaching the small building. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone here?" Silence answered him. He pushed open the door, which hung precariously from a single hinge, and peered inside. "It's empty. Well, mostly." We followed him cautiously. The interior was a single room, perhaps 12 feet square, with a dirt floor and crude shelving along one wall. A rusty wood stove sat in one corner, its pipe disappearing through a hole in the ceiling. The only furniture was a 3-legged stool and a small table, both looking ancient and rotted. "What's that smell?" Naomi asked, covering her nose. There was indeed a strong odor. Not the expected mustiness of an abandoned building, but something sharper, more organic. It reminded me of a taxidermy shop I'd once visited, the chemical tang of preservation mixed with the underlying scent of death. "Look at this," Jasper said, examining the shelves. They held an assortment of glass jars, their contents difficult to discern through clouded glass and years of dust. I stepped closer, wiping a sleeve across one jar to clear the grime. Inside, suspended in murky liquid, was what appeared to be a human hand, the flesh shrunken and gray against the bones. I recoiled, knocking the jar with my elbow. It teetered on the edge of the shelf before Coda caught it. "Easy," he said, replacing the jar. "Let's not disturb anything." "We should go," I said, backing toward the door. "This isn't right." "Wait," Naomi called, her voice strange. She was staring at the far wall, where crude drawings covered the rough-hewn logs. "These look like the carving from the cabin." She was right. The wall was covered in variations of the same elongated figure we'd seen carved by the cabin door. Some depicted it alone, others showed it pursuing human-like shapes. One particularly disturbing image showed the figure standing over prone human forms, long arms extended downward. "Atasaya," I murmured, remembering the name from the cabin listing. "What?" Jasper asked. "Atasaya's domain. That's what they call this area, remember?" I moved closer to the drawings, noticing text scrawled beneath some of them. The writing was faded and difficult to read, but I could make out a few phrases. "Walks between worlds, wears the skins, hungers for essence." "Guys," Coda said from near the door, his voice tight, "we've got company." I turned to see him staring out through the broken window. Following his gaze, I saw movement at the forest's edge, not the tall, thin figure from before, but something on all fours, moving with an unnatural gait. It paused at the tree line, and even from this distance I could tell it was looking directly at the cabin. "Is that a wolf?" Naomi asked, joining Coda at the window. "Too big for a wolf," he replied, "and the way it's moving, it's not right." The creature suddenly stood up on its hind legs, its form shifting and elongating until it resembled a human figure, but wrong somehow, as if someone wearing an ill-fitting suit. It took a step toward the cabin, then another. "Block the door," I hissed, moving to shove the small table against the entrance. Jasper helped me, while Coda looked around frantically for anything we could use as a weapon. He seized a broken piece of shelving, testing its heft. "The windows," Naomi said. "They're not covered." Indeed, the windows were merely empty frames, the glass long gone. They were small, too small for an adult human to climb through comfortably. But I wasn't convinced our visitor was constrained by human limitations. "We need to make noise," Coda decided, banging his makeshift club against the wood stove. "Maybe scare it off." The metallic clanging echoed loudly in the small space. Outside, the approaching figure paused, its head tilting at an impossible angle. Then it did something unexpected. It spoke. "Come out, friends," it called, the voice unnervingly similar to Coda's. I found the way back. It's not far. We froze, looking at each other in horror. The voice was Coda's, perfectly mimicked, but Coda himself stood beside us, his face drained of color. "Don't answer," he whispered. "Whatever you do, don't respond to it." "Naomi?" the voice called next, now a perfect imitation of Jasper. "I need your help. I'm hurt." Naomi pressed her hands over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The creature had changed tactics, now shuffling with an exaggerated limp, one arm hanging as if injured. "It's trying to lure us out," I realized aloud. "It's mimicking us to make us lower our guard." "What do we do?" Jasper asked, his voice barely audible. I looked around the cabin's interior, desperate for inspiration. My eyes fell on the wood stove. "Can we light a fire? Smoke it out, or scare it with the flames?" Coda examined the stove. "Maybe. There's some old wood here, and I have a lighter." While he worked on getting a fire started, I continued searching the cabin for anything useful. Beneath a pile of moldy burlap in the corner, I found a leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age. Opening it carefully, I discovered it was some kind of journal, the handwriting cramped and difficult to decipher. "Listen to this," I said, skimming the pages. "May 15, 1936. Third night watching the trees. It comes when the moon is highest. Takes different shapes now. Not just animals. Saw it wearing Johnson's face yesterday, though Johnson has been dead 2 weeks." "What is that?" Naomi asked, momentarily distracted from the threat outside. "A journal. Someone who stayed here before." I flipped forward several pages. "They call it skinwalker in some traditions. Witch that can take the form of any creature it's killed. But that's not right. This is older. Much older." Outside, the creature had begun circling the cabin, sometimes crawling along the ground like an animal, sometimes walking upright like a man. It continued calling out with our voices, cycling through each of us, mixing pleas with taunts. "Here," I read from another page. "The old Shoshone woman told me its true name, Atasaya, the cannibal demon. It doesn't just want your body, it wants your essence, your spirit. It hunts by confusion and fear, makes you doubt what's real." "Great," Jasper muttered. "That's really helpful right now." The stove was smoking badly, filling the cabin with acrid fumes, but providing a psychological barrier between us and what lurked outside. Coda had managed to get a small fire going, feeding it with bits of broken shelving. I continued reading, skimming for anything useful. Iron repels it, salt burns it, but neither kills it. Only way to escape is to reach hallowed ground before dawn. "Hallowed ground?" Naomi repeated. "Like a church?" I scanned further. Cabin built on old burial site. Stones in circle. Safe there, but only at night. During day, it can cross. "Burial sites are often considered sacred," Jasper said. "Maybe our rental cabin?" It had that carving by the door like a ward or protection symbol. "Worth a shot," Coda agreed. "But how do we get past that thing?" As if in answer, a loud thump came from the roof, followed by scrabbling sounds. The creature was climbing onto the cabin. "We need to go now," I said, stuffing the journal into my pocket. "While it's on the roof, head for the shore, then follow the lake back toward our cabin." We moved the table away from the door as quietly as possible. Coda raised his club, and I gripped a rusted fire poker I'd found near the stove. Jasper and Naomi had armed themselves with broken pieces of shelving. "Ready?" I whispered. They nodded grimly. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Coda yanked the door open, and we burst out, running full tilt toward the lake. Behind us came a shriek of rage, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. I didn't look back, focusing only on reaching the water's edge. We splashed into the shallows, wading as quickly as possible, the water reaching our knees. The shore curved ahead, and if we could round that point, we'd be out of sight from the abandoned cabin. Jasper, who had taken the lead, suddenly stopped. "Oh no," he breathed. Standing on the shore ahead, blocking our path, was another figure, identical to the one behind us. It stood perfectly still, watching as we faltered in the water. "There's more than one," Naomi whispered in horror. "Or it can move faster than we thought," I said. Either way, we were trapped between two predators, with darkness falling rapidly around us. Twilight descended over the lake, the water turning from blue to slate gray to black as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. We stood frozen in the shallows, caught between the creature following from the cabin and its twin blocking our escape along the shore. "The water," Coda suggested urgently. "We go deeper in. They seem to prefer staying on land." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. We moved further into the lake, the cold water rising to our waists. The bottom was rocky and uneven, forcing us to move carefully to avoid stumbling. Behind us, the first creature reached the shore, joining its counterpart. They stood side by side, watching us with an unsettling patience. "What are they waiting for?" Jasper whispered, clutching his makeshift weapon. "Night to fall completely," I guessed, remembering the journal's words. "They hunt in darkness." As if confirming my theory, the creatures began to change as the last light faded from the sky. Their forms seemed to melt and reform, growing taller, thinner, less human in their proportions. Their arms elongated until they nearly touched the ground, and their heads stretched upward, features disappearing into shadow. "Keep moving," I urged, pushing deeper into the water. "Follow the shoreline from out here." We waded parallel to the shore, the water now at chest height. The cold was intense, seeping into our bones, but fear kept us moving. The creatures paced us from land, occasionally testing the water's edge, but not venturing in. "I don't think I can stay in this much longer," Naomi said through chattering teeth. The cold, she was right. Hypothermia would kill us long before we could circle the entire lake. We needed another plan. "The cabin can't be that far," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We've been following the shore for hours. It has to be around one of these bends." "And what if it isn't?" Jasper asked. "What if we've been going in circles?" It was a possibility I'd been trying not to consider. The lake was larger than it had appeared from our cabin, and without clear landmarks, we could easily have become disoriented. As we rounded another rocky point, Coda suddenly stiffened. "Look," he said, pointing across the water. At first I saw nothing in the gathering darkness. Then a light flickered, faint but unmistakable, glowing warmly in the distance. "Is that the cabin?" Naomi asked, hope creeping into her voice. "Has to be," Coda replied. "Nothing else out here has electricity." The light was perhaps a mile away, on what appeared to be the opposite shore. Swimming would be faster than continuing to wade along the perimeter, but the water was dangerously cold, and none of us knew what might be lurking beneath the surface. Our decision was made for us when one of the creatures suddenly entered the water, moving with a horrible fluid grace, its elongated limbs propelling it forward like some nightmare version of a swim stroke. "Go!" I shouted. "Swim for the light." We plunged forward, abandoning the shallow water for the depths. The cold hit me like a physical blow as I began to swim, my waterlogged clothes dragging against every stroke. Behind us, I could hear splashing, the sound of pursuit. The distance seemed impossible, the light barely growing larger as I swam with increasing desperation. My muscles burned with cold and exertion, and my lungs struggled to find enough air. The others were nearby, their own labored breathing and splashing forming a counterpoint to the sounds of the creature gaining on us. Something brushed against my leg underwater, a touch so light it might have been weeds, except for the deliberate way it wrapped around my ankle. I kicked frantically, breaking free, and renewed my efforts to reach the distant shore. "It's the cabin," Coda called out suddenly. "I can see the dock." He was right. As we drew closer, The light resolved into the familiar outline of our rental cabin, a golden glow spilling from its windows onto a small wooden dock extending into the lake. "Almost there," I gasped, my limbs numb and movements increasingly uncoordinated. The splashing behind us had stopped, but I didn't dare look back to see if our pursuers had given up or simply gone silent. Every ounce of my remaining strength was focused on reaching that dock, on the promise of safety it represented. Jasper reached it first, hauling himself up with trembling arms. He turned immediately to help Naomi, who was struggling to stay afloat. Coda and I were close behind, our fingers clawing at the rough wood as Jasper grabbed our wrists and pulled. We collapsed on the dock, gasping and shivering, too exhausted to immediately move toward the cabin. The night air was bitter against our soaked skin, but the simple fact of being out of the water felt like salvation. Did we lose them?" Naomi asked between shuddering breaths. I forced myself to look back across the dark expanse of water. Nothing disturbed its surface, now a perfect mirror for the rising moon. "I think so," I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. The journal mentioned hallowed ground. Maybe the cabin area is protected somehow. "Let's not test that theory," Coda said, struggling to his feet. "Inside. Now." We staggered up the dock and across the short stretch of shore to the cabin. The door was just as we'd left it, unlocked. Coda pushed it open and we tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us and throwing the deadbolt. The warmth of the cabin was almost painful against our frozen skin. We stood dripping on the entryway rug, suddenly aware of how bedraggled and frightened we must appear. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," Jasper said practically. "Then we can figure out what to do next." We dispersed to our rooms, changing quickly into dry clothes before reconvening in the main room. Coda had built a fire in the fireplace, its warmth slowly driving away the deep chill from our swim. "So what now?" Naomi asked, huddled under a blanket on the couch. "Do we leave tonight?" I checked my phone. Still no signal. I don't think driving out in the dark is a good idea. Those Forest Service roads are treacherous, even in daylight. "So we wait until morning?" Coda didn't sound thrilled with the prospect. "What about them?" I pulled the journal from my pocket. Miraculously, it had survived the swim, though the pages were damp and even harder to read. "According to this, we're safe here at night. It's some kind of protected ground. But not during the day," Jasper remembered. "So we need to leave at first light before they can cross onto the property." "Exactly," I agreed. "We pack tonight, leave at dawn, drive straight back to Seattle without stopping." "And if they're waiting on the road?" Naomi asked quietly. None of us had an answer for that. The possibility that we might already be trapped was too terrible to contemplate. We spent the next hour preparing for a hasty departure, packing our belongings, loading what we could into the SUV, making sure our phones and cameras were charged in case we needed them. All the while, I kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see those elongated shapes watching from the tree line. As we finished our preparations, an unnatural silence fell over the cabin. Even the crackling of the fire seemed muted, as if sound itself was being smothered by some external pressure. "Do you feel that?" Coda asked, looking up from his backpack. We all nodded. There was a presence outside, a palpable weight against the walls and windows, like the atmosphere before a violent storm. "They're testing the boundaries," I guessed, thinking of the journal's description of hallowed ground. "Seeing if they can get in." A sound came then, a slow, deliberate scratching along the exterior wall of the cabin. It moved from window to window, a methodical exploration of our shelter. We stood motionless, barely breathing, as the scratching circled the entire cabin before returning to the front door. Then a voice called out, my voice, perfectly replicated. "Let me in," it said. "I got separated from you in the water. I'm freezing out here." No one moved. The voice called again, this time using Naomi's pleading tones, then Jasper's, then Coda's. Each mimicry was flawless, down to the subtle accent patterns and vocal quirks. "We know what you are," Coda finally shouted toward the door. "You can't trick us." A moment of silence followed. Then a new voice responded, one that belonged to none of us. It was ancient sounding, with a strange lilting quality that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "We have hunted in these woods since before your kind built with stone," it said. We have worn 1,000 skins, known 1,000 names. Skinwalker, Wendigo, Atasaya. The names change. The hunger does not. What do you want? I called out, though I already suspected the answer. To feed, the voice replied simply. To wear your forms as we have worn so many before. To know your memories, your fears, your loves. You can't come in, Jasper said, his voice cracking slightly. This place is protected. A sound like laughter, but wrong, dissonant, emanated from beyond the door. Protection fades. Blood seeps from the earth. The old magic thins. As if to emphasize this point, a violent thump shook the front door, making us all jump. The deadbolt held, but the wood around it splintered slightly. The car, I whispered urgently. We need to make a run for it now. But the journal said they can cross during the day, Naomi protested. I don't think we have until daylight, Coda replied grimly as another blow struck the door, widening the crack in the frame. We moved quickly, grabbing our emergency bags and car keys. The SUV was parked just 15 feet from the front porch, a short sprint, but one that would expose us completely. Back door? Jasper suggested. I shook my head. They're probably surrounding the cabin. Our best bet is to all run together, straight for the car. Coda, you have the keys. The rest of us will cover you until you get it started. Another powerful blow hit the door, this time accompanied by the sound of wood giving way. We had seconds, not minutes. On my count, I said, positioning myself near the door. 3, 2, 1, go! I threw the deadbolt and yanked the door open. We burst out onto the porch, momentarily blinded by the darkness after the cabin's light. Shapes moved in the yard. Tall, impossibly thin figures that seemed to flow rather than walk, converging rapidly on our position. Run! I shouted, pushing Coda ahead toward the SUV. We sprinted across the yard, the creatures closing in from all sides. One lunged at Naomi, its elongated arm reaching for her shoulder. Jasper swung his backpack, striking the limb away with a sound like breaking branches. The creature recoiled, but only for a moment. Coda reached the SUV first, fumbling with the key fob. The vehicle's lights flashed as the doors unlocked, and we piled in, slamming and locking the doors just as the first creature reached us. It pressed against the driver's side window, a face that was not a face, just stretched skin over an elongated skull, with hollow pits where eyes should be. Coda jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. More creatures surrounded the vehicle, their limbs scrabbling against the metal and glass, seeking entry. One climbed onto the hood, its body contorting in ways that defied anatomy. Another jumped onto the roof, the impact denting the metal above our heads. Go! I shouted as Coda threw the SUV into reverse. We shot backward, the sudden acceleration throwing the creature off the hood. Coda spun the wheel, turning us toward the access road, then shifted into drive and floored the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, tires spinning on the gravel before finding purchase. The creatures gave chase, moving with incredible speed on their elongated limbs. For a terrible moment, I thought they might catch us. Then the SUV's power asserted itself, and we began to pull away. Don't slow down, I urged Coda, watching the shapes recede in the side mirror. Not until we hit the main road. The Forest Service road was even more treacherous in darkness, the SUV's headlights illuminating only a short distance ahead. Coda drove with reckless determination, navigating the twists and bumps by instinct as much as sight. We clung to whatever handholds we could find, jerking and swaying with the vehicle's motion. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the road widened and the surface changed from gravel to pavement. We had reached the county highway. Did we make it? Naomi asked, her voice small in the darkness of the car. I looked back one last time. The road behind us was empty, the forest a solid wall of blackness. I think so, I said cautiously. But we shouldn't stop until we're back in Seattle. Coda nodded grimly, keeping his foot heavy on the accelerator as we sped away from Atasaya's domain, leaving behind the ancient hunger that dwelled in those remote woods. The drive back to Seattle passed in a blur of headlights and tension. We spoke little, each of us lost in our own thoughts, processing what we had experienced. Coda drove mechanically, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Jasper kept watch out the rear window, as if expecting pursuit even on the interstate. Naomi dozed fitfully beside me, occasionally startling awake with small sounds of distress. Dawn broke as we approached the city, the familiar skyline emerging from the morning mist like a promise of normality. Only when we were firmly within the bounds of civilization, surrounded by the morning commute traffic, did I feel the knot in my chest begin to loosen. We returned to my apartment, exhausted but too wired to sleep. While Naomi showered and Jasper made coffee, Coda and I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the journal I had taken from the abandoned cabin. Its pages had dried into stiff, wrinkled sheets, but the text remained legible. "We should destroy it," Coda said quietly. "Burn it and forget everything that happened." I ran my fingers over the faded handwriting. Would that change what we experienced? Would it make it less real? He had no answer for that. The journal's final entry, dated October 3rd, 1937, read simply, "They follow, not just in the forest now. I see them in town, wearing familiar faces, wearing my friend's skin. No one believes me. Moving east tomorrow. Maybe they can't cross the mountains." "He ran," I said, "just like we did." "Smart man," Coda replied. When Jasper and Naomi joined us, we attempted to discuss what had happened, to make sense of our experience in the rational light of day. But the conversation kept circling back to the same unanswerable questions. What were those creatures? Why had they hunted us? Had we truly escaped? "I've been researching skinwalkers," Naomi said, showing us her laptop screen. "There are similar legends in many Native American traditions. Navajo have skinwalkers, Algonquian have Wendigo. Others have different names for similar concepts." The journal mentioned Atasaya, I reminded them, said it was older than the other legends. "Here," Naomi said, pointing to her screen. "There's a brief mention in this folklore collection. Atasaya is described as a cannibal demon in some Pueblo traditions, a predator that consumes not just flesh, but spirit. That fits with what it said to us," Jasper noted. "The hunger does not change." A sober silence followed his words. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythms, traffic flowing, people walking to work, life proceeding as if our world hadn't been fundamentally altered. "What do we do now?" Coda finally asked. "Report it to someone? The Forest Service? Local authorities?" "And tell them what?" I countered. "That we were chased by ancient shape-shifting entities? They'd think we were hoaxers or hallucinating from bad mushrooms. So we just move on?" Naomi looked incredulous. "Pretend it never happened?" "Not pretend," I said, "but accept that some experiences can't be shared or validated by the wider world. This is something only we know, only we understand." "I'm canceling my hiking plans for the foreseeable future," Jasper said with a weak attempt at humor. "Thinking of taking up indoor rock climbing instead." A laugh, small but genuine, broke the tension. We spent the rest of the day together, reluctant to separate, finding comfort in our shared experience, even as we began the process of compartmentalizing it, of fitting it into lives that needed to continue. That evening, Jasper and Naomi left for their hotel, planning to fly back to Australia the following day. Coda decided to stay one more night before returning to Vancouver. As I walked him to the guest room, he paused in the hallway. "Do you think they could follow us?" he asked quietly. "Like the journal said?" I considered lying, offering reassurance, but we'd been through too much together for that. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if they could, wouldn't they have done it already?" He nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "Just be careful, okay? Watch for signs." "You too," I replied. Later, alone in my room, I found myself drawn to the window, staring out at the city lights. Seattle felt foreign after the primal terror of the forest, too bright, too loud, too filled with distractions. But somewhere beneath the urban veneer, I sensed the ancient earth still pulsing, still harboring secrets older than humanity. I thought about the journal's author, fleeing east across the mountains. Had he found peace? Or had the hungry shadows eventually caught him? I would never know. In the weeks that followed, we stayed in close contact, sharing nightmares and paranoia, supporting each other through the process of reintegration into normal life. Jasper and Naomi postponed their wedding plans, needing time to process their experience. Coda took a leave of absence from work, spending time with his family on Vancouver Island. I found myself unable to sleep without lights on, jumping at shadows and studying strangers' faces for signs of something inhuman wearing human skin. Gradually, though, the sharp edges of memory began to dull. Not enough to forget, never that, but enough to function, to move forward. We had survived Atasaya's domain, carrying our experience like a secret talisman, a reminder that the world is larger and stranger than most people ever realize. Sometimes, especially when fall winds rattle my windows, I take out the journal and read its yellowed pages. Not for answers. I've accepted there are none to be found, but as a connection to others who have glimpsed behind the veil of ordinary reality. And sometimes, in the moments between waking and sleep, I think I hear a sound like scratching at my bedroom door. A voice that might be my own calls my name, asking to be let in. I keep the deadbolt locked just in case. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between promotional newsletters and work updates. My college friend Kai had organized a cross-country camping trip, a 2-week adventure through some of America's most remote wilderness areas. His message exuded enthusiasm, descriptions of pristine lakes, ancient forests, and starlit nights away from civilization. A reunion of old friends. "You need this," my girlfriend had said when I showed her the invitation. "You've been working too hard." She wasn't wrong. The past year had been brutal, an endless cycle of deadlines and stress that left little room for anything else. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something purely for enjoyment. The thought of disconnecting, truly disconnecting from emails, calls, and the relentless pace of city life was more appealing than I cared to admit. 3 weeks later, I found myself at a small regional airport in northern Montana, squinting against the bright sunlight as I scanned the parking lot for Kai's weathered blue truck. I spotted it pulling up with a cloud of dust trailing behind. Kai hadn't changed much since our university days. Same crooked smile, same relaxed demeanor, though a few more wrinkles framed his eyes. "You made it!" he exclaimed, throwing my duffel into the truck bed. "Thought you might bail at the last minute." "Almost did," I admitted. "Work's been crazy." "City life," he scoffed playfully. 2 weeks out here and you'll forget what a deadline even is." As we drove away from the airport, the landscape gradually transformed. Towns became sparser, mountains loomed larger, and forests stretched endlessly on either side of the increasingly narrow roads. Kai filled me in on the others who would be joining us. Maya and Levi from Vancouver, a couple he'd met during a hiking expedition in the Canadian Rockies 2 years ago, and Jasper, an Australian photographer documenting North American wilderness areas for a book. "They're already at the first campsite," Kai explained. "Place called Whispering Pines, not on most maps. Local secret. Old lodge there hasn't been used in years, but the area around it is perfect for camping." The drive took nearly 3 hours, the last 45 minutes on a rutted dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. My phone had lost service an hour back, and the GPS had given up entirely, leaving us to rely on Kai's memory and a tattered paper map. "Almost there," he said as we rounded a bend and the trees opened to reveal a small clearing. Beyond it lay a vast, mirror-like lake, the water so still it perfectly reflected the surrounding pine-covered mountains and the cloud-streaked sky above. On the shore stood 3 tents and a small figure waving enthusiastically. As we pulled closer, I could make out Maya's distinctive red hair catching the sunlight. Next to her, Levi was tending to a small campfire, while a tall, lean man I assumed was Jasper fiddled with camera equipment. The knot of tension I'd been carrying between my shoulders began to ease as I stepped out of the truck. The air was different here, clean and sharp with the scent of pine and something else I couldn't quite identify, something ancient and earthy. "Welcome to nowhere," Maya called out, approaching with a thermos. "Coffee? We just brewed some." That first evening passed in the comfortable haze of new acquaintances becoming friends. Kai had chosen well. Maya and Levi were experienced outdoors people with endless stories of backcountry adventures, while Jasper's dry Australian humor and extraordinary photographs of remote landscapes kept us entertained as night fell. It was only when the conversation lulled, in that moment when everyone had fallen quiet to stare up at the carpet of stars overhead, that I noticed it, a strange, unsettling feeling that we were being watched. I turned toward the dense line of trees behind our camp, peering into the darkness. "Something wrong?" Kai asked, noticing my distraction. Just thought I heard something, I replied, unwilling to voice the irrational unease that had suddenly gripped me. Probably just wildlife, Levi offered. Bears are active this time of year, but they usually won't bother a group our size. I nodded, not entirely convinced. The feeling persisted even as we retired to our tents, a vague discomfort that made me strain to identify every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves in the forest beyond. Eventually, exhaustion overtook vigilance, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The dream came without warning, intense and vivid. I was running through unfamiliar woods, pursued by something I couldn't see but could sense behind me, gaining ground with each labored breath I took. The trees seemed to whisper as I passed, their branches reaching toward me like gnarled fingers. Ahead, a dilapidated cabin appeared, its windows dark and uninviting. Despite every instinct screaming to keep running, I found myself drawn toward it, stumbling up rotting wooden steps to a door that opened on its own. Inside, a figure stood with its back to me. Slowly, impossibly slowly, it began to turn. I woke with a gasp, heart hammering against my ribs. The tent was bathed in the gray light of early dawn, and outside, birds had begun their morning chorus. Next to me, Kai's sleeping bag was empty. I checked my watch, 5:47 a.m. Unzipping the tent, I stepped out into the cool morning air. A light mist hung over the lake, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. No sign of Kai, but a movement near the tree line caught my eye. A dark shape, too large to be a deer, too small for a bear, slipped between the trees and vanished. "Kai!" I called, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No answer, just the soft lapping of water against the shore and the distant call of a loon. That's when I noticed the tracks, a set of footprints leading from our camp toward the forest, partially obscured by something that had been dragged alongside them. Something heavy. I followed them to the edge of the trees, hesitating as they continued into the shadowy forest beyond. The voice of reason told me to wake the others, but curiosity pushed me forward, deeper into the woods, following the increasingly disturbing trail. The footprints ended abruptly at a small clearing where the ground was scuffed and disturbed, as if a struggle had taken place. My heart rate quickened as I spotted a dark stain on a nearby rock. Bending closer, I confirmed my fear. It was blood, still wet. Looking for something? I whirled around to find Kai standing behind me, a string of fish in one hand, a filleting knife in the other. Relief flooded through me. Jesus, you scared me. Where did you go? Thought I'd surprise everyone with fresh fish for breakfast, he said, holding up his catch. What are you doing out here? I pointed to the tracks and the blood-stained rock. I saw these and thought. My voice trailed off as I realized how paranoid I sounded. Kai laughed. That's where I cleaned the first fish. Didn't want to do it near camp and attract animals. He gestured to the disturbed ground. And those marks are from me dragging this fallen branch to sit on while I worked. I felt foolish but oddly unconvinced. Something about Kai's explanation seemed rehearsed, his casual tone forced. And his eyes, they didn't quite meet mine as he spoke. Come on, he said, turning back toward camp. Let's get these cooking before the others wake up. I followed, glancing back once more at the disturbed clearing. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't quite match its surroundings, watching silently from the depths of the forest. That moment marked the beginning, the first subtle indication that something wasn't right. I should have listened to that initial warning, that whisper of danger. But I didn't. None of us did. And by the time we understood what was happening, it was already too late. The strange unease I'd felt that morning faded as the day progressed. Under the warm sunlight, my concerns seemed overblown, even ridiculous. We spent the day exploring the pristine shoreline, swimming in the crystal-clear lake, and mapping out our journey for the days ahead. Kai had planned an ambitious route through increasingly remote terrain, each campsite more isolated than the last. Tomorrow we head west, he explained over dinner, pointing to a spot on his well-worn map. Place called Ashen Valley, used to be sacred grounds for local tribes. Why Ashen? Maya asked, stirring the pot of stew bubbling over our campfire. Forest fire about 100 years ago, Levi answered before Kai could. Burned everything to the ground. It's grown back since, but parts of it still have this eerie, scarred look. Jasper perked up at this. Sounds perfect for photography. Any historical sites there? Kai hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Some old structures. Mostly ruins now. Indigenous ruins? I asked, suddenly curious. Mixed, Kai replied vaguely. Area has a complicated history. The conversation shifted to other topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Kai was holding something back. As darkness settled around us, Levi suggested we share stories, a camping tradition. Maya went first with a tale about getting lost on a backcountry trail in British Columbia, followed by Jasper's harrowing encounter with a venomous snake in the Australian outback. When it was Kai's turn, he leaned forward, his face illuminated by the orange glow of the fire. You ever heard of the Ahote? He asked, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. We shook our heads. It's what the original inhabitants of this region called the skinwalkers, not the touristy version, the real thing. He glanced around as if checking that we were alone. Story goes that they were once medicine men who gained power by breaking tribal taboos. They could take the shape of animals, but never perfectly. Always something off about them, something wrong. Despite the warmth of the fire, I felt a chill run down my spine. There are still parts of these forests where people won't go after dark, Kai continued, places where the boundaries between our world and theirs are thin. The natives believe the Ahote are drawn to outsiders, to those who don't know the rules, who don't show proper respect. Have you ever seen one? Jasper asked, his skepticism evident. Kai's expression remained neutral. I've seen things I can't explain. The mood had shifted, a subtle tension spreading through our small group. Maya laughed nervously, breaking the spell. Well, on that cheerful note, I think I'll turn in. Early start tomorrow, right? As the others prepared for bed, I stayed by the fire with Kai, watching the embers slowly fade. That story, I began, choosing my words carefully. Is that why you seemed off this morning, in the woods? Kai's eyes reflected the dying firelight. What do you mean? You just seemed, I don't know, not yourself. He was quiet for a long moment. Just tired, didn't sleep well. He stood, stretching. You shouldn't worry about old legends. They're just stories. But his casual dismissal didn't match the intensity I'd witnessed as he'd told the tale. I remained by the fire long after he'd retreated to our tent, listening to the night sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, and something else, something that might have been the wind through the trees but sounded unnervingly like whispered words in a language I didn't understand. Morning came with a thin drizzle that dampened our spirits and gear alike. We packed in relative silence, the previous night's stories lingering uncomfortably in the air between us. The drive to Ashen Valley took most of the day, the roads, if they could be called that, deteriorating as we ventured deeper into the wilderness. What Kai hadn't mentioned was that Ashen Valley was accessible only by a narrow mountain pass that seemed to barely accommodate his truck. On one side, a sheer cliff face. On the other, a dizzying drop into a ravine. Maya gripped the dashboard as Levi stared straight ahead, visibly tense. In the back, Jasper and I exchanged glances that communicated a shared thought. This is far more extreme than we signed up for. We emerged from the pass just as dusk was settling, the landscape opening up to reveal a vast valley surrounded by imposing mountains. Even in the fading light, I could see what had given the valley its name. Amid the new growth forest stood the blackened skeletons of ancient trees like charred sentinels rising from the mist. Home for the next few days, Kai announced, pulling into a small clearing. Unlike our previous site, there was no lake here, just a narrow stream winding through the valley floor, and the omnipresent burned trees creating twisted shadows against the darkening sky. As we set up camp, I noticed small stone structures scattered throughout the area. Crude piles that might once have been cairns or markers of some kind. Jasper photographed them enthusiastically, while Maya kept glancing nervously at the tree line. This place feels wrong, she whispered to me as we collected firewood. Like we're trespassing. I couldn't disagree. There was something oppressive about the valley, a heaviness that had nothing to do with the damp air or the looming mountains. It felt watched, but not in the natural way of wildlife observing intruders. This was different, calculated, patient, almost anticipatory. Dinner was a subdued affair. Even Jasper, usually talkative, seemed withdrawn, his attention repeatedly drawn to the darkened forest beyond our campfire's reach. Levi tried to lighten the mood with stories of misadventures from previous camping trips, but his efforts fell flat. As we prepared for bed, I noticed Kai placing small objects around the perimeter of our camp, smooth stones with odd markings scratched into their surfaces. "What are those for?" I asked. He looked almost embarrassed to be caught. "Just an old habit. The locals used to believe they offered protection." "From the Ahote?" I pressed. Kai nodded reluctantly. "Among other things." "You don't actually believe—" "It doesn't matter what I believe," he interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Some traditions deserve respect, that's all." I backed off, retreating to my tent with more questions than answers. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange noises. Not the normal sounds of a forest at night, but something more deliberate. Scratching. Movements that seemed to circle our camp. And voices, or what might have been voices, low and guttural, speaking words that made no sense but filled me with inexplicable dread. At some point I must have fallen into deeper sleep because the dream returned with startling clarity. This time I was in the dilapidated cabin from before, but I wasn't alone. The figure I'd glimpsed previously stood in the center of the room, its back still toward me. Around it were scattered personal belongings, a watch, a wallet, a familiar-looking camera. "Who are you?" I heard myself ask. The figure began to turn, slowly revealing a face that was almost human but fundamentally wrong, features that shifted and blurred as I tried to focus on them. Its eyes, though, were perfectly clear, ancient, knowing, and filled with malicious intent. "You brought it here," a voice said from behind me. I turned to find Kai standing in the doorway, his expression one of resigned horror. "You shouldn't have come." Before I could respond, the inhuman figure moved with impossible speed, not toward me, but toward Kai. As it reached him, it began to transform, its body contorting and reshaping until I woke with a strangled cry, drenched in cold sweat despite the chill night air. The tent was dark, but through the thin fabric I could see that dawn was approaching, casting a faint gray light over our campsite. Kai's sleeping bag was empty again. This time I didn't hesitate. Pulling on my boots and jacket, I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the misty morning. The camp was still, no sign of anyone else awake. I checked the others' tents. Maya and Levi were sound asleep, but Jasper's tent was empty as well. A sense of urgency drove me toward the trees where I'd seen Kai place his protective stones. They were still there, but something was wrong. Each one had been turned upside down, the markings now facing the earth. Next to one, a clear footprint pressed into the damp soil, not a human print, but something with elongated toes and what looked like claws. Heart pounding, I followed the direction the print seemed to indicate, moving deeper into the forest where the burned trees stood like black pillars against the lightening sky. I called out for Kai and Jasper, my voice sounding flat and muffled in the strange acoustics of the valley. A rustling to my left made me freeze. Slowly, I turned to see a large shape moving through the undergrowth. Too big for a deer, too fluid for a bear. It paused, and I caught a glimpse of what might have been an antlered head, but the proportions were wrong, the neck too long, the posture too upright. It shifted slightly, and I realized with rising horror that it was looking directly at me. I ran. Blind panic propelled me forward, away from the creature, deeper into unfamiliar territory. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but terror kept me moving. I had no direction, no plan beyond escape. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I was completely lost. The mist had thickened, reducing visibility to mere yards in any direction. The skeletal trees all looked the same, offering no landmarks to orient myself. As my breathing steadied, I became aware of a sound, water flowing. Following it, I emerged from the trees to find myself at the bank of a wider section of the stream that cut through the valley. And there, kneeling at the water's edge, was Jasper. Relief flooded through me. "Jasper, thank God. There's something in the woods. We need to get back to camp." He didn't respond or turn, continuing whatever he was doing at the water's edge. "Jasper?" I approached cautiously, the relief giving way to a new anxiety. When I was just a few feet away, he finally turned, and I stumbled backward in shock. It was Jasper's face, but like in my dream, something was fundamentally wrong. His features seemed fluid, as if they might run together at any moment, and his eyes were completely black, reflecting nothing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice oddly layered, as if multiple people were speaking simultaneously. "This isn't for you to see." I backed away as he rose to his full height, which seemed greater than I remembered, his limbs too long, his movements too smooth to be entirely human. "What are you?" I whispered. He, or the thing that looked like him, tilted its head at an impossible angle. "I am becoming," it replied, "as we all must." Beyond him I now saw what he had been crouching over, a strange arrangement of stones, bones, and what looked horribly like fresh blood, forming a pattern I couldn't comprehend but that filled me with instinctive revulsion. "Where's Kai?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Preparing," Not Jasper replied. "We've waited a long time for the right vessels. Your friend understood what was needed in the end." With sudden clarity, I realized what was happening, or thought I did. Kai hadn't brought us here for a camping trip. He'd brought us here as sacrifices. Before I could react, a shout from behind me shattered the moment. I turned to see Maya standing at the edge of the trees, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as she took in the scene. "Run!" I yelled, but it was too late. The thing that was not Jasper moved with inhuman speed, clearing the distance between them in seconds. I lunged forward, desperate to help, but intense pain exploded at the back of my head, and darkness rushed in from all sides. My last conscious thought was that we'd been led into a trap centuries in the making. I returned to consciousness slowly, my head throbbing with each heartbeat. Voices drifted in and out, familiar yet wrong, like hearing friends speak through a distorted filter. I kept my eyes closed, instinct warning me that revealing my awareness might be dangerous. "The ritual must be completed by midnight," someone was saying. Levi's voice, but with that same unnatural layering I'd heard from Jasper. "What of the others?" This voice was Kai's, but strained, as if he were in pain or fighting against something. "They will serve as vessels, as agreed. The exchange must be honored." "I never agreed to this." Kai's voice broke with emotion. "You said observation only. You promised no one would be harmed." A new voice joined the conversation, one I hadn't heard before. Deeper, resonant, speaking in a language that seemed to shift between comprehensible English and something far older. The terms were clear. 5 observers for 5 vessels. The balance must be maintained. Through my barely opened eyes, I could make out that I was in some kind of structure. The cabin from my dreams, I realized, with a jolt of fear. The walls were rough-hewn logs, blackened with age, and what must have been the same fire that scarred the valley. A small window showed it was late afternoon. I'd been unconscious for hours. I was bound to a chair, arms secured behind me, rope cutting into my wrists. Turning my head slightly, I saw Maya similarly restrained nearby, still unconscious. No sign of Jasper. At the center of the cabin stood Levi, but changed, his posture too rigid, his movements jerky, as if his body were an ill-fitting suit. Before him knelt Kai, head bowed, and looming above them both was something. I couldn't focus on it directly. My mind seemed to slip away from its form, registering only impressions, antlers, elongated limbs, a face that was almost human, but constructed incorrectly, like a child's drawing brought to horrifying life. "The first transition is complete," Not Levi said. "The Australian's essence was compatible. His memories serve us now." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Jasper was gone, his body now inhabited by something else, something ancient and malevolent. And Kai had led us here knowing this might happen. I must have made some sound because suddenly all attention turned to me. The creature's gaze fell upon me, and I felt a pressure in my mind, as if something were trying to look inside, to root through my thoughts and memories. "This one is awake," it said, the words forming in my mind rather than my ears. "Its fear is exquisite." Kai looked up, meeting my eyes with an expression of complicated guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know it would be like this. They said they just wanted to observe humans, to understand us. A cultural exchange, they called it." "Cultural exchange?" I repeated, finding my voice hoarse and weak. "What the hell are they, Kai?" "The old tribes had many names for them," he replied, Skinwalkers is the term most people know, but that's not quite right. They're older. They were here before humans, before names. They've been watching us since we first entered their territories. And you knew? The betrayal stung almost as much as the fear. You brought us here to them? Not like this, he insisted. They approached me last year during a solo hike, showed me things, knowledge, history, perspectives no human has ever seen. They said they wanted to learn from us too, to observe a group of friends in their domain. In exchange for the opportunity, they offered wisdom. I thought, he faltered. I thought it would be beautiful. Beautiful? Maya's voice came weakly from beside me. She had awakened and heard enough. You sacrificed us for a research project? The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, a dry, rattling noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Your kind always reduces what it cannot understand. This is no sacrifice. It is transformation, evolution. We have watched your species stumble blindly for millennia. Now we offer guidance. By stealing our bodies? I pulled against my restraints, feeling the rope bite deeper. Your consciousness will join with ours, not Levi explained. You will not die. You will become more. Where's Jasper now? Maya demanded. Is he still in there somewhere? The thing wearing Levi's form tilted its head at an unnatural angle. Parts of him remain, the useful parts. The rest dissolves. I thought of Jasper by the stream, the wrongness in his eyes, and felt sick with the realization that my friend was effectively dead, pieces of his mind cannibalized by whatever entity now wore his body. And what about him? I nodded toward Kai. Why isn't he tied up? The mediator has a different role, the creature said. He brings the vessels. He maintains the balance. In return, he is permitted to retain his form. You son of a bitch, I spat at Kai. You're working for them. No, Kai looked desperate. I didn't know they wanted to take you over. I swear they said observation only. When I realized what was happening this morning, I tried to warn you, to lead you away, but Jasper was already... He couldn't finish the sentence. Why us? Maya asked, her voice steadier now, analytical despite her fear. Why not random hikers or campers? Why friends? The creature's attention shifted to her, and I saw her flinch under its gaze. Bonds, it said simply. We study your connections. The deepest insights come from those emotionally entwined, and such bonds make the transition smoother. A terrible thought occurred to me. This isn't the first time, is it? You've done this before. Those stones Kai placed around the camp, they weren't protections. They were markers. Signals. Kai couldn't meet my eyes, confirmation enough. How many? I pressed. How many groups have you brought here? This is the 5th, he whispered. I didn't know what happened to the others. They said they'd gone home with new perspectives. I believed them. The creature moved, flowing rather than walking to the cabin's single door. The sun sets, it announced. Prepare the remaining vessels. The conjunction approaches. Not Levi nodded, then moved to a corner of the cabin where I now saw a collection of objects, knives, bowls, and what looked disturbingly like human bones. As he busied himself with whatever grotesque preparation was required, I leaned toward Kai. Untie us, I hissed. This is your chance to make it right. He glanced nervously at Not Levi's back. I can't. They're everywhere. In the trees, in the shadows. They see everything. Then we're all dead, Maya stated flatly. Or worse than dead. Kai's expression shifted, resolve hardening his features. Not if I can complete the true exchange. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that gleamed in the fading light. A polished stone covered in symbols similar to those he'd placed around our camp. What is that? I asked. A key of sorts. The elders of the local tribe gave it to me when I first encountered the beings. Said if things went wrong, it could restore balance. But it requires a willing sacrifice. Before I could respond, Not Levi turned, sensing our whispered conversation. What are you doing, mediator? He demanded, eyes narrowing. In one fluid motion, Kai pressed the stone into my bound hand. then lunged at not Levi, tackling him to the ground. "Run!" he shouted as they struggled. "Get to the stream, the crossing stone." Maya and I stared in shock as Kai fought the thing wearing our friend's body, a battle he was clearly losing as not Levi's movements became increasingly inhuman, limbs bending at impossible angles to gain leverage. The ropes around my wrists had loosened. Kai must have partially cut them while pretending to check our restraints. With a final wrench, I freed my hands, the stone clutched tightly in my palm, and moved quickly to untie Maya. Not Levi had pinned Kai to the floor, hands around his throat. "Betrayal has consequences, mediator," he hissed, his face beginning to ripple and shift, revealing something hideous beneath the human facade. We had seconds, no more. Grabbing Maya's hand, I pulled her toward the door, bursting outside into the twilight forest. Behind us, Kai's scream cut through the air, then stopped abruptly. We ran blindly at first, the only thought to put distance between ourselves and the cabin. The stone burned in my hand, not with heat, but with some other energy that pulsed in rhythm with my racing heart. "The stream!" Maya gasped as we paused for breath. Kai said to find the crossing stone. I nodded, trying to orient myself. The sound of water guided us, and we pushed on through the darkening forest. Strange noises pursued us, not footsteps, but an odd rustling, as if the forest itself were shifting to track our movement. "There!" Maya pointed to where the stream widened, a series of stepping stones breaking its surface. At the center was one larger than the rest, marked with carvings similar to those on the stone I carried. We splashed into the shallow water, scrambling toward the central stone. Behind us, movement in the trees, multiple shapes, fluid and wrong, converging on our position. Among them I recognized the twisted forms that had once been Jasper and Levi, their bodies now even further from human, elongated and bent in ways that defied anatomy. "What do we do?" Maya cried as we reached the central stone. The stone in my hand pulled toward its larger counterpart as if magnetically attracted. Instinctively, I knew what was required, and the cost. "Maya," I said quickly, "when I place this stone, run. Don't look back. Just keep going downstream until you reach the valley's edge. Find help." "What are you talking about? We're both going." I shook my head, the terrible understanding clear now. "A willing sacrifice," Kai said. "Someone has to stay and complete the exchange." The shapes were at the water's edge now, their movements hesitant, as if the stream itself posed some barrier. It wouldn't hold them long. "No," Maya protested. "There has to be another way." "There isn't time." I pressed the stone into her hand. "You have to be the one to go. Tell people what happened here." Before she could argue further, I placed my hand over hers, and together we pressed the smaller stone into a perfectly shaped depression in the larger one. Light erupted from the connection, a shock wave of energy that knocked us both backward. The effect on our pursuers was immediate and violent. They recoiled, their forms seeming to tear at the edges, as if the light were physically pulling them apart. Not Jasper let out a wail that no human throat could have produced, the sound reverberating through the valley like the cry of a dying god. "Go!" I pushed Maya toward the far bank. "Now!" Tears streaming down her face, she hesitated for just a moment before turning and running, following the stream as I'd instructed. I watched until she disappeared into the gathering darkness, then turned to face what was coming. The being that had once been the creature from the cabin approached the stream's edge, its form constantly shifting between human appearance and something far older and more terrifying. When it spoke, its voice echoed both in the air and inside my mind. "The exchange cannot be stopped," it said. "Only redirected." "I know," I replied, a strange calm settling over me. "That's why I'm still here." It tilted its head, or what passed for a head in its current manifestation, studying me with ancient, inhuman eyes. "You offer yourself willingly?" I thought of Maya escaping, of Kai's final act of redemption, of the mysterious warning in my dreams that I'd failed to heed until it was almost too late. "Not to you," I clarified. "To the balance." The thing seemed to consider this, then nodded, a gesture that appeared to ripple through its entire being. "Then approach, vessel. Complete what was begun." Taking a deep breath, I stepped off the central stone and waded toward the creature, the icy water of the stream numbing my legs. As I reached the bank, It extended a limb that was neither arm nor branch, but something between, its surface shifting like smoke given temporary solidity. Our contact was like fire and ice simultaneously, pain beyond description as something ancient and vast began to pour into my consciousness. But unlike what had happened to Jasper and Levi, I wasn't being overwritten or consumed. Instead, I felt myself expanding, connecting to something larger, the forest, the valley, the very land itself. In that moment of terrible clarity, I understood what the true exchange had always been meant to be. Not domination, but communion. Not replacement, but synthesis. These beings hadn't always been predators. They'd been guardians, watchers at the threshold between worlds who had forgotten their purpose. And in remembering, in that moment of willing connection, something fundamental shifted. The boundaries between us blurred, knowledge flowing in both directions. I saw their history, their origins before human memory, their slow corruption as they grew isolated and alien to the changing world. And they saw through me the complexity of human connection, the capacity for sacrifice that transcended self-preservation. The last thing I remember clearly was falling to my knees at the stream's edge, the world around me transforming as my awareness expanded beyond the confines of individual consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I was both myself and something more. Maya never looked back, just as I'd told her. She ran through the night, following the stream until it widened into a river that eventually led her to a ranger station at the edge of the national forest. Her story of kidnapping, of friends gone missing in the wilderness, prompted a search operation, helicopters and ground teams combing Ashen Valley for any sign of us. They found the cabin, empty now except for signs of struggle and strange markings carved into the walls. They found our abandoned campsite, the tents still standing, our belongings untouched. They found Kai's truck, keys in the ignition. What they didn't find were bodies or any conclusive evidence of what had happened. After 2 weeks, the search was scaled back. After a month, it was officially suspended. Missing persons reports were filed. Families were notified. Theories ranging from animal attacks to cult activity circulated in local papers, but without proof, interest eventually waned. Maya tried to tell them the truth, about the creatures, about the possession of our friends, about the ancient exchange that had been corrupted over centuries. But who would believe such a story? In time, even she began to question her own memories, wondering if trauma had distorted her perception of events. I know all this because I see it. Fragmented at first, like watching scenes from multiple lives simultaneously, but growing clearer as I learned to navigate my expanded consciousness. I am still myself, but I am also the forest, the valley, the mountains. I exist in the spaces between moments, in the whisper of wind through leaves, in the flow of water over stone. And I am not alone. The others are here too, not as they were, but as echoes, patterns preserved in the collective awareness that spans this ancient place. Jasper's eye for beauty, Levi's steady resolve, Kai's remorse and final courage, all preserved, all part of the new balance. The beings that once called themselves Ahote are changing as well. Our communion restored something they had lost: perspective, empathy, purpose. They no longer seek to possess or consume, but to connect and understand. The corruption that twisted their nature is slowly unwinding, revealing their original function as guardians of the threshold between worlds. Sometimes, when the light hits the valley just right, hikers report seeing strange figures watching from among the burned trees, neither fully animal nor human, but something in between. Local tribal elders nod knowingly at these accounts, but say little. They understand what has happened here, what balance has been restored. I reach out occasionally, testing the boundaries of my new existence. Once, nearly a year after the events in Ashen Valley, I managed to appear to Maya in a dream. I showed her that I was still here, still conscious, still watching over the forests and mountains. I'm not sure she believed it was really me. Dreams have their own logic, after all, but she seemed comforted nonetheless. 2 years later, she returned to the valley with an elder from the local tribe, a man who understood the old ways and the nature of the exchange. They stood at the crossing stone where I had made my choice, and the elder performed a ceremony of acknowledgement and gratitude. "We see you, guardian," he said in his native tongue. We honor your sacrifice. I manifested as best I could, a shimmer in the air, a momentary solidification of mist and light in roughly human form. Maya gasped, tears streaming down her face as recognition dawned. "Is it really you?" she whispered. I couldn't speak as humans do, not anymore, but I could project feelings, impressions. I reached out with gratitude, with reassurance, with the peace I had found in my new existence. The elder nodded, understanding. "He is both himself and more than himself now," he explained to Maya. "He walks between worlds, as the guardians were always meant to do." "Can he come back?" she asked. "Can he be human again?" The elder shook his head. "The exchange once made cannot be unmade, but neither is it an ending. It is transformation, evolution, a doorway, not a death." Maya approached cautiously, hand outstretched. When her fingers passed through the mist that constituted my current form, she felt what I wanted her to feel. Not coldness or loss, but connection, continuation. The presence of something familiar within something vast. "I'll come back," she promised, wiping away tears. "I'll remember." And she has every year since, sometimes alone, sometimes with others who seek to understand the true nature of the wild places, the thin spaces where worlds overlap. I watch over them all, as I watch over all who enter these forests, not as a threat but as a guide, a reminder of the ancient contract between humanity and the wilderness. There are others like me now, in different places where the old boundaries have thinned. Some chose their transformation willingly as I did. Others found it thrust upon them, but have made peace with their new existence. Together, we form a network of awareness that spans continents, a living record of both human and non-human history. The dreams still come, but I am no longer their subject. I am their source. I reach out to those who need warning, guidance, or simply the knowledge that the natural world is more complex and aware than they imagine. Most dismiss these dreams as their own creation, but some understand, some remember. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night when the modern world grows quiet, I gather with the others in the valley. The original beings who have been here since before human memory, and the newer guardians who were once fully human. We share knowledge, perspective, existence itself. In those moments, I am reminded that what seemed like an ending was merely transformation. That what appeared to be a horror story was actually something far more complex, a restoration of ancient balance, a healing of wounds inflicted by time and forgetting. I am still here, in the whisper of pine needles underfoot, in the mist that rises from the valley floor at dawn, in the shadows that stretch long at sunset. I'm still watching, still remembering, still telling this story, our story, to those who have ears to hear it. Listen for me when you walk in the wild places. I will be there, echoing between the trees, neither fully human nor fully other, but something that remembers being both. And if you feel eyes upon you, if you sense a presence just at the edge of awareness, do not fear. We are the guardians, the watchers, the keepers of old bargains and new understanding. We are the twisted echoes of what once was and what may be again, when the worlds remember how to speak to one another. We are waiting, and we are listening. I never expected to find myself living alone in one of the most remote ranger stations in the Olympic National Forest. My name is Kohana, meaning swift in Lakota, a name given to me by my grandmother who always said I was quick to act, but sometimes slow to think. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps that's what led me here. The Blackwater Ranger Station sits nestled between towering Douglas firs and western red cedars, perched on a rocky outcropping that overlooks Crescent Lake. From my cabin porch, the water stretches like a dark mirror, reflecting the jagged mountain peaks that surround it. Most days, it's breathtakingly beautiful. But when the fog rolls in, as it often does, there's something unsettling about this place, something ancient and watchful. I took this assignment 3 years ago after burning out from my job as an emergency room nurse in Seattle. The constant barrage of human tragedy had hollowed me out. I needed silence, solitude, and purpose that didn't involve watching people die despite my best efforts. The Park Service offered all three, though I hadn't anticipated just how profound the silence could be. My cabin is rustic but functional, A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom with running water, a luxury in these parts. The walls are lined with topographical maps, field guides, and emergency protocols. Radio equipment sits on a desk by the window, my lifeline to civilization when the weather knocks out the spotty cell service. That night in early October, rain lashed against the windows as I sat by the fire, reviewing reports of unusual wildlife activity in the eastern quadrant. 3 hikers had reported strange noises and massive humanoid tracks near Whisper Ridge. Normally, I'd dismiss such accounts as the product of overactive imaginations, but these hikers were experienced outdoorsmen, not easily spooked by normal forest sounds. The radio crackled to life, startling me from my thoughts. Blackwater Station, this is dispatch, over. I grabbed the handset. This is Blackwater, go ahead. We've got a potential search and rescue situation. Family of 4 reported overdue from a day hike to Mirror Falls, vehicle still at trailhead. With this weather system moving through, command wants eyes on the trail at first light. Copy that. I'll head out at dawn. Any details on the family? Parents in their 30s, kids ages 8 and 6. Tourists from California, not experienced hikers. I sighed. Understood. I'll report in before heading out. One more thing, Kahana. James is driving up from Port Angeles tonight to assist. ETA approximately 2,300 hours. James Rivera was a fellow ranger from the Coastal District, one of the few people I considered a friend out here. His arrival was welcome news. Search operations were always better with backup. Copy that. I'll keep the light on for him. After signing off, I moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass to peer into the darkness. The rain had transformed into a deluge, water cascading off the roof in sheets. No family with young children should be out in this. I hoped they'd found shelter somewhere along the trail. A flicker of movement caught my eye, something large shifting between the trees at the edge of my clearing. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing upright, impossibly tall against the tree line. Then lightning flashed, and there was nothing but rain and darkness. I stepped back from the window, an inexplicable chill running across my skin. The rational part of my brain attributed the sighting to a combination of poor visibility, exhaustion, and suggestion from reading those hiker reports. Yet something deeper, more primitive, whispered caution. I busied myself preparing for tomorrow's search operation and James's arrival. Extra coffee in the pot, thermal blankets ready for the missing family, first aid kit refreshed. Routine tasks to quiet the unease growing inside me. When headlights finally swept across the yard around 11:30 p.m., I felt genuine relief. James's truck rumbled to a stop, and moments later, he burst through my door in a spray of rainwater. Some welcome party this storm is throwing, he laughed, shaking water from his Forest Service jacket. James always had an easy demeanor that contrasted with my more reserved nature. Glad you made it in one piece. Coffee? I'd kill for some. He accepted the mug gratefully, warming his hands around it before taking a long sip. So, lost family in this weather? Not good. No, I agreed. Trail to Mirror Falls has some tricky sections even in good conditions. James nodded, then gave me a curious look. You seem on edge. Something else going on. I hesitated, uncertain whether to mention what I thought I'd seen. James was pragmatic, science-minded. He'd likely attribute it to the same causes I had initially. Just concerned about the search tomorrow. If this rain keeps up, the streams will be swollen. Makes everything more dangerous. He seemed to accept this, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. We'll find them, always do. Usually, I corrected. We both knew search and rescue operations didn't always end happily. As we reviewed maps and planned our approach for morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice I caught myself glancing toward the windows, expecting to see something staring back. Each time there was only darkness and the relentless rain. Later, as I lay in bed listening to James's gentle snoring from the couch, strange sounds filtered through the cabin walls. Not the familiar hoots of owls or distant howls of coyotes, but something different, rhythmic, almost deliberate. Like wood knocking against wood. 3 distinct knocks, followed by silence, then 3 more. I told myself it was just branches in the wind, But deep down, in places I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew it wasn't. Something was out there in the darkness. Something that wanted us to know it was there. Sleep came eventually, but my dreams were filled with shadowy figures moving just out of sight, and eyes, intelligent, watchful eyes, observing me from the blackness between the trees. Morning brought no relief from the rain, but at least visibility had improved. James and I were gearing up for our search when the radio buzzed with unexpected news. The missing family had stumbled into a highway rest area 20 miles south, cold, wet, and embarrassed, but alive and uninjured. They'd taken a wrong turn, realized their mistake too late, and ended up hiking out to the road instead of backtracking. "Well, that's the best kind of search and rescue," James remarked as he packed away the emergency supplies. "The kind where they rescue themselves." I nodded, relief mingling with a strange disappointment. With the immediate crisis resolved, James would likely head back to his station. The prospect of being alone again after last night's unsettling experiences left me uneasy. As if sensing my thoughts, James's phone chimed. After checking the message, his face lit up. "You're not going to believe this, but Maya and Liam are in Seattle. They're asking if they can drive out to visit." Maya and Liam, both of them, here? I couldn't hide my surprise. Maya Bouchard was a wildlife biologist from Quebec who'd worked with us on a wolf reintroduction project 2 summers ago. Liam Hartley was an Australian adventure photographer we'd befriended during a forest fire emergency last year. The odds of both being in the Pacific Northwest simultaneously seemed astronomical. Apparently, they're both speaking at some environmental conservation conference. Maya saw my social media post about heading to your station and reached out. They've got 3 days before flying home. Despite my general preference for solitude, the idea of our unlikely international friend group reuniting at my remote cabin was appealing, especially now. "Tell them to come," I said, "but warn them about the accommodations and the weather." James grinned. "Oh, I'm sure Mr. Australia will have plenty to say about your Pacific Northwest drizzle." By mid-afternoon, the small gravel parking area outside my cabin held James's truck and a rented SUV. Maya's exuberant hug nearly knocked me over as she burst through the door, her French-Canadian accent more pronounced than I remembered. "Kohana, your hermit kingdom is even more beautiful than I imagined," she exclaimed, dark eyes taking in every detail of my Spartan living quarters. Liam followed with his characteristic easy smile, camera already hanging around his neck. "Gotta admit, mate, when you said remote, I wasn't picturing quite this remote. My satellite phone gets better reception in the outback." The cabin felt transformed by their presence, warmer, livelier, safer somehow. As we caught up around the fireplace, sharing stories from our respective corners of the world, I felt the tension of the previous night beginning to dissolve. Maybe what I'd experienced had been nothing more than stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind. Maya, ever the scientist, was particularly interested in the local wildlife. "Any unusual sightings lately? This ecosystem is so diverse compared to what I work with in Quebec." I hesitated, James catching my eye with a curious expression. "Actually," I began carefully, "there have been some odd reports from hikers. Strange noises at night, large tracks that don't match known wildlife." Liam perked up immediately. "Bigfoot country, isn't it? The Olympic Peninsula is famous for sightings." James rolled his eyes. "Please don't encourage the cryptid enthusiasts. We get enough of them trampling protected areas looking for Sasquatch." "I'm serious," Liam insisted. "I did a photo essay on cryptozoology believers last year. The Pacific Northwest has the highest concentration of Bigfoot reports in the world. Some of the witnesses I interviewed were pretty credible. Park rangers, game wardens, scientists. All due respect to your interview subjects," Maya interjected, "but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. No body, no Bigfoot." Their good-natured debate continued while I prepared dinner, occasionally offering my own perspective as someone who'd spent 3 years in this wilderness. I didn't mention what I thought I'd seen the previous night. Despite our friendship, I wasn't ready to face their skepticism, or worse, their concern for my mental health. After dinner, Liam suggested heading out to the lakeshore to attempt some night photography. "The rain's finally stopped and I've been wanting to try this new low-light technique. Anyone want to join?" Maya immediately volunteered, and after some coaxing, James agreed as well. I hesitated, an inexplicable dread settling in my stomach at the thought of venturing into the darkness. "I'll stay and clean up," I offered. "Someone should keep the fire going." They didn't press me, for which I was grateful. As they bundled up and headed out with flashlights and camera equipment, I tried to dismiss my apprehension as irrational. They were just going to the lakeshore, barely 200 yards from the cabin. What could possibly happen? The answer came less than 20 minutes later. I was washing dishes when I heard it, a scream that made my blood turn to ice. It was Maya's voice, tinged with raw terror. I abandoned the half-cleaned pots and grabbed my rifle and flashlight, racing toward the door. Outside, the night air was cold and still. No wind, no animal sounds. An unnatural silence had descended on the forest. I swung my light toward the path to the lake, calling out, "Maya, James, Liam, what's happening?" Seconds later, they emerged from the darkness, running at full speed. Maya reached me first, her face ashen. "Inside," she gasped. "We need to get inside now." Once the door was locked behind us, they collapsed into chairs, breathless and visibly shaken. Liam's expensive camera dangled forgotten from his neck. James, usually the calmest among us, was checking that all the windows were secured. "What happened?" I demanded. They exchanged glances, none seeming eager to be the first to speak. Finally, Maya found her voice. "We were setting up near that big rock outcropping by the water. Liam was adjusting his tripod when we heard splashing, like something very large was moving through the shallows. I thought it was a moose or elk," James continued. "I shined my light toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Then we heard it again, closer but from a different direction." Liam nodded. "Whatever it was circling us, moving fast, too fast for something that size." "What size?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Massive," Maya whispered, when it finally stepped into view at the edge of our light. She shook her head as if unable to continue. "It was upright," James said flatly. "At least 7 feet tall, maybe 8, covered in dark hair." Liam opened his camera with trembling hands. "I managed one photo before we ran. Probably too dark to see much, but..." The image on his digital display was mostly black, with the foreground showing the rocky lakeshore illuminated by their flashlights. But at the edge of the light's reach, partially obscured by trees, was a large, dark figure. The photo was blurry, the figure indistinct, but one detail stood out with disturbing clarity. 2 reflective eyes, set in a face that seemed both human and not, staring directly at the camera. "Delete it," Maya said suddenly. "Delete it now." Liam looked at her in shock. "This could be evidence of..." "I don't care what it could be evidence of," she cut him off. "Something doesn't want us here, and I have no intention of provoking it further." To my surprise, James nodded in agreement. "I've been a ranger for 12 years. I know every animal in these forests. What we saw wasn't in any field guide." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and our still rapid breathing. "I saw something similar last night," I finally admitted. "At the edge of the clearing. I thought it was my imagination." "Well, our imaginations don't share hallucinations," Liam said grimly, "and they don't leave footprints." "Footprints?" I asked. He nodded. "Huge ones, on the muddy path as we ran back. Definitely bipedal, but not human." We stayed up late into the night, debating what to do. Maya, the most skeptical among us hours earlier, now advocated for leaving first thing in the morning. Liam wanted to set up cameras and try to document whatever was out there. James and I were caught in the middle, bound by duty to this place, but increasingly convinced we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. Eventually, exhaustion claimed us. We arranged sleeping areas, Maya taking my bed, the rest of us in sleeping bags in the main room. I volunteered for first watch, unable to contemplate sleep with the memory of those reflective eyes still fresh in my mind. As my friends drifted off, I sat by the window, rifle across my lap, staring into the darkness. Around 3 a.m., a heavy fog rolled in, shrouding the cabin in milky whiteness, and from within that fog came the knocking again. 3 distinct knocks, followed by silence, then 3 more. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from right outside my door. None of us slept much that night. By morning, we were exhausted, jumpy, and divided on how to proceed. Maya still wanted to leave immediately. Liam had shifted from excitement to caution but remained determined to document whatever was out there. James had radioed his supervisor requesting a few additional days at my station, citing wildlife monitoring without specifying exactly what wildlife had caught our attention. I was torn. Part of me wanted my friends safely away from whatever danger lurked in these woods. Another part recognized that their presence had forced me to confront something I'd been subconsciously avoiding for months. The growing sense that I wasn't alone in this wilderness, that something was watching, waiting. "We need to approach this systematically," Maya said over breakfast, her scientific training asserting itself despite her fear. "If there really is an undocumented species out there—" "It's not just undocumented," Liam interrupted. "Every culture has stories about these creatures. The Native Americans called them Sasquatch. In Australia we have the Yowie. They're in the Himalayas, the Caucasus Mountains, the forests of Canada." "Folklore doesn't make something real," Maya countered, though with less conviction than she might have mustered before last night. "Let's start with what we know for certain," I suggested, trying to ground our discussion in reality. "Something large and bipedal is in these woods. It's aware of us, possibly territorial. It can move quickly and quietly, and it seems to be trying to communicate in some way." "The knocking," James nodded. "That's been reported by Bigfoot researchers for decades. Some think it's a form of long-distance communication between individuals." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You've been holding out on us, James. Sounds like you know more about this subject than you let on." He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I grew up in these mountains. Every kid here grows up with Sasquatch stories. Most rangers publicly dismiss them, but privately, we talk, compare notes. There are certain areas even experienced rangers won't go alone." "And you neglected to mention this when I requested assignment to the most isolated station in the district?" I asked, feeling a mix of annoyance and betrayal. "Would you have believed me?" he replied simply. "Besides, most rangers go their whole careers without encountering anything unusual. It's just bad luck, or good luck, depending on your perspective, that something has taken an interest in this area recently." After breakfast, we decided to investigate the lakeshore in daylight. Despite my misgivings, I was curious to see the footprints Liam had mentioned. If nothing else, physical evidence might help us determine what exactly we were dealing with. The morning was crisp and clear, the storm having moved eastward overnight. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a perfect day for hiking or canoeing on the lake. Instead, we moved as a group, hyper-aware of our surroundings, weapons ready. James and I carried our service pistols, while Maya had armed herself with bear spray. Only Liam seemed relatively at ease, camera in hand, eager to document whatever we might find. The path to the lake showed clear signs of our friends' panicked flight the night before: broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, and deep footprints in the mud where they had run. But interspersed with these were other prints, the ones that had caught Liam's attention. "There," he pointed, crouching down to examine a particularly clear impression in a patch of soft earth. We gathered around, staring in disbelief. The footprint was enormous, easily 18 inches long and proportionally wide. It showed 5 distinct toes and an arch like a human foot, but the dimensions were all wrong, too large for even the biggest human. "Could it be a hoax?" Maya suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't really believe it. James shook his head. "Look at the depth of the impression. Whatever made this weighs hundreds of pounds, and there's no sign of artificial edges or tools that would be needed to create a fake print this detailed." "The stride length is incredible too," I noted, measuring the distance between prints. "Over 4 feet between steps. No human could manage that, especially moving at speed." Liam was photographing everything from multiple angles. "The pressure ridges in the mud show it was moving toward the cabin last night following your trail. It was chasing you." A heavy silence fell over our group as the implication sank in. Whatever had frightened them at the lake had pursued them back toward the cabin, only stopping short of actually revealing itself in the clearing. "We need to report this," Maya said finally. "Contact whatever wildlife authorities handle this sort of thing." James and I exchanged glances. "It's complicated," he said. "Officially, the Forest Service doesn't acknowledge Sasquatch reports. They're filed under unusual occurrences and generally forgotten. Going public would likely result in ridicule at best, and at worst, a flood of curiosity seekers trampling the forest, looking for a glimpse." "So we do nothing?" Maya asked incredulously. "No," I said, my decision crystallizing. "We document everything, gather as much evidence as we can, and then decide who to trust with it. But we need to be strategic." We followed the tracks as far as we could. discovering they led from the lake into a densely wooded area to the north, a section of the forest I rarely patrolled due to its rough terrain and lack of established trails. The footprints eventually disappeared on rocky ground, but not before we'd documented dozens of clear impressions. On our way back to the cabin, Liam spotted something caught in a thorn bush, a tuft of long, dark hair, coarser than human hair, but not matching any known wildlife in the region. Maya carefully collected it in a plastic bag, her scientific curiosity now fully engaged, despite her lingering fear. "I can send this to a colleague at the university for DNA analysis," she said. "Someone discreet. If it's an unknown primate species—" She didn't finish the thought. We all understood the implications. If we could provide legitimate scientific evidence of Sasquatch, it would be revolutionary, and potentially dangerous for the creatures themselves. Back at the cabin, we developed a plan. We would set up trail cameras around the perimeter of the clearing and near the lake. We'd take turns on watch duty throughout the night. Most importantly, we'd document everything meticulously: photographs, measurements, sample collection, and detailed written observations. As we worked through the afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Occasionally birds would fall silent, or the forest sounds would change in a way that raised the hair on the back of my neck. Once, looking up from adjusting a trail camera, I caught a glimpse of movement among distant trees. Something large shifting position, staying just out of clear view. By evening, we had transformed my simple ranger cabin into a makeshift research station. Maps covered the kitchen table, marked with sighting locations and tracking data. Liam's photographs were displayed on his laptop, including enhanced versions of the blurry night shot that increasingly revealed disturbing details. A massive slouched shoulder line, a heavy brow ridge, eyes that seemed to reflect not just light, but a disturbing intelligence. "I've been thinking about the knocking," James said as we prepared dinner. "If it is communication, maybe we should respond." Maya looked alarmed. "You want to invite interaction with something that chased us last night?" "It had every opportunity to harm us if that was its intention," he pointed out. "It's curious about us, territorial maybe, but I don't think it's actively hostile." "Unless we provoke it," I added, "which is why we need to be careful about how we proceed." The discussion continued into the night, theories and counter-theories flowing as freely as the coffee we used to keep ourselves alert. Despite the scientific nature of our conversation, an undercurrent of tension remained. Every unexpected sound from outside drew immediate silence and wary glances. Around midnight, the first evidence from our trail cameras arrived in the form of an alert on Liam's phone. One of the devices had captured movement. We clustered around his screen, breath held collectively as he opened the image. The night vision photo showed the edge of the clearing, trees ghostly green in the infrared illumination, and there, partially obscured but unmistakable, was a large figure standing upright among the trunks. The quality was better than the previous night's accidental shot. We could clearly see a massive, hair-covered form, arms hanging longer than a human's would, a head that sat directly on powerful shoulders with little visible neck. Though still shrouded in shadow, there was no denying what we were looking at. A creature that matched descriptions of Bigfoot in every detail. "It's still out there," Maya whispered. "Right now." "Watching us," Liam added, his earlier enthusiasm significantly dampened. As if in confirmation, 3 distinct knocks sounded from the darkness beyond our walls, close, deliberate, a message we couldn't decipher. Without discussion, we extinguished all lights except a single small lamp. We gathered our weapons and waited in tense silence, listening to the night sounds of the forest and the heavy footsteps that now circled our cabin with deliberate slowness. Whatever intelligence lurked in the darkness, it knew we were aware of it now. The subtle game of observation had ended. A new phase had begun, and none of us could predict what would happen next. I woke suddenly, disoriented in the pre-dawn gloom. I'd fallen asleep during my watch, something I'd never done before, regardless of how exhausted I was. The cabin was silent except for the soft breathing of my friends. Something felt wrong. I scanned the room, trying to identify what had triggered my unease. Everything seemed in place. James asleep on the couch, Maya curled in a chair, Liam's sleeping bag on the floor. Empty. Liam's sleeping bag, was empty. I moved quickly to the bathroom, finding the door open and the room unoccupied. A quick check of the small bedroom yielded the same result. Liam was gone. "James, Maya, wake up," I called, already reaching for my rifle and flashlight. They stirred groggily, confusion giving way to alarm as I explained the situation. "Could he have stepped outside for some reason?" Maya suggested, though her expression indicated she didn't believe it. "Without waking any of us? Without taking his jacket or camera?" I shook my head. "Something's wrong." James checked the door. "It's still locked from the inside," he reported, his face paling. "All windows secure too." We stood in bewildered silence. How could someone vanish from a locked cabin without disturbing 3 light sleepers? It defied logical explanation. "His phone," Maya said suddenly. "Can we track it?" A search located Liam's phone on the table where he'd left it while charging. No clues there. "We need to search outside," I decided. "Now, before we lose any more time." Dawn was breaking as we stepped onto the porch, the forest emerging from darkness in shades of gray and muted green. The air felt unnaturally still, fog clinging to the ground in wispy tendrils. "Liam!" James called, his voice echoing across the clearing. No response came except for the startled flight of a few ravens from nearby trees. We split up to search the immediate area around the cabin, staying within sight of each other. I took the path toward the lake, alert for any sign of our missing friend. The ground was damp with dew, but I saw no fresh tracks, not Liam's, not the creature's, nothing to indicate recent passage. At the lakeshore, I found our trail camera still in place, its small indicator light blinking to show it was operational. I checked the footage on my phone, scrolling through images captured overnight. What I saw made no sense. At 3:17 a.m., the camera had triggered, capturing a clear shot of Liam standing at the water's edge, fully dressed, staring out across the lake. His posture was unnatural, rigid, his expression blank. The next image, time-stamped just 2 minutes later, showed the same scene, but Liam was gone. I enlarged the images, searching for any clue to what had happened in those missing minutes. The second photo showed ripples on the water's surface, as if something large had recently disturbed it. But there was no sign of Liam entering the lake, no indication of a struggle. I radioed James and Maya, directing them to join me. As we studied the photos together, a sense of dread settled over us. "He looks like he's sleepwalking," Maya observed, pointing to Liam's vacant expression in the first image. "But how did he get out of the cabin?" James asked. "And why would he come down to the lake in the middle of the night?" I had no answers, only a growing conviction that we needed help. Professional search and rescue teams, additional rangers, anyone who could assist in covering the vast wilderness surrounding us. "I'm calling this in," I decided, reaching for my radio. "Missing person in potentially life-threatening circumstances." The response was immediate. Within an hour, the first helicopter swept over the forest, beginning a grid search of the area. By mid-morning, the quiet isolation of my ranger station had been shattered by the arrival of search teams, police officers, and emergency personnel. I provided the basic facts: an overnight guest had disappeared under unusual circumstances, but omitted our Bigfoot encounters. James followed my lead, recognizing that introducing cryptid sightings would only complicate and potentially delegitimize the search effort. Maya pulled me aside as teams were being organized. "We can't hide what we've seen," she insisted. "It could be crucial to finding Liam." "These people won't believe us," I replied quietly, "not without proof. And right now, our priority has to be finding Liam alive." She reluctantly agreed, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. We both knew we were withholding potentially vital information. The search expanded throughout the day, covering miles of rugged terrain in all directions from the cabin. Divers explored the lake, finding nothing. Tracking dogs followed scents that inexplicably disappeared at the water's edge, as if Liam had simply vanished into thin air. As daylight began to fade, the search coordinator, a veteran named Sergeant Winters, gathered everyone for an update. "We've covered all logical ground search areas with no sign of the missing individual. Given the time frame and environment, we're shifting to a recovery operation rather than a rescue." His expression was grim but professional. "Teams will continue at first light tomorrow." Recovery, not rescue. The words hit like physical blows. They believed Liam was dead, drowned in the lake perhaps, or fallen from some unseen cliff. Maya turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. James placed a comforting hand on her back, his own expression hollow with grief. Most of the search teams departed as darkness approached, leaving behind a few officers and rangers who would maintain a base camp overnight. James, Maya, and I returned to the cabin, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken fears. "We need to tell them everything," Maya said once we were alone. "The footprints, the photos, the knocking, all of it." "And be labeled as hysterical or delusional?" James argued. "How would that help Liam?" "Because whatever took him isn't human," she snapped back. "They're looking for a drowning victim or accident, not—" Her voice faltered, unable to complete the thought. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by guilt and uncertainty. Had I led my friends into danger by keeping silent about the strange occurrences I'd experienced before their arrival? Was Liam now paying the price for my reticence? "There's something else," I said quietly, drawing their attention. "Something I haven't told you." I described the months of escalating incidents, shadows glimpsed between trees, tracks found on patrol, strange sounds in the night. How they had begun as rare occurrences but increased in frequency and boldness over time. "Why didn't you report this?" James asked, his professional ranger identity momentarily overriding our friendship. "For the same reason we're not telling the search teams now," I replied. "Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself until recently." Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Sergeant Winters entered, his expression unreadable. "I need to speak with you all," he said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Something's come up." My heart raced. Had they found Liam, or evidence of something worse? "One of my officers discovered unusual tracks near the northern perimeter of our search area," Winters continued. "Large, humanoid footprints that don't match any known wildlife, or any of the search team members." We exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. "Normally, I'd dismiss such findings," he added. "But I've worked search and rescue in these mountains for 20 years. I've seen those tracks before. And I've seen people go missing in exactly this way." The revelation stunned us into silence. Finally, Maya spoke. "You know about the creatures." Winters nodded slowly. "Not officially. Never officially. But among longtime rangers, emergency services, local tribes, there's an understanding. Some areas have guardians, ancient beings that don't appreciate human intrusion." "Bigfoot," James said flatly. "That's the popular name," Winters agreed. "The native peoples have older names and more detailed knowledge. They've coexisted with these beings for centuries." I leaned forward. "Do they take people?" "Rarely. Usually they just frighten intruders away from certain territories. But sometimes, when humans persist in areas they consider forbidden, yes, people disappear." "Is Liam dead?" Maya asked bluntly, her voice breaking. Winters hesitated. "Not necessarily. There are stories of people being returned, changed, disoriented, but alive." "What do we do?" I asked, desperation edging my voice. "How do we get him back?" "We need to consult someone with deeper knowledge than mine," Winters replied. "There's an elder from the local tribe who sometimes assists in unusual cases. I've already contacted him. He'll be here at dawn." That night, none of us slept. We sat vigil together, jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. The knocking came again, as it had each previous night, but now it seemed to carry a different rhythm. 4 knocks instead of 3, repeated at irregular intervals. "It's communicating," Maya whispered, "trying to tell us something." "Or warning us," James suggested grimly. I said nothing, watching the darkness beyond our windows and wondering what ancient forces we had disturbed in this remote wilderness, and whether Liam, wherever he was, could still be saved. Elder Joseph Redwing arrived as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. He was an imposing figure despite his age, tall and lean, with deep-set eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw on multiple levels. Sergeant Winters made the introductions with a deference I'd never seen him show to anyone else. "These are the witnesses I told you about," Winters explained. "Their friend disappeared last night." Elder Redwing nodded gravely. "Show me everything, leave nothing out." For the next hour, we shared our experiences, The footprints, the knocking, the trail camera photos, Liam's inexplicable disappearance from a locked cabin. The elder listened without interruption, occasionally closing his eyes as if visualizing what we described. When we finished, he remained silent for several long moments. Finally, he spoke. "What you encountered is known to my people as Skookum, the forest guardian. They are ancient beings, here long before humans. Mostly they avoid contact, preferring solitude in the deepest wilderness." "But something changed," I prompted. "They've become more active, more visible." Elder Redwing nodded. "The balance is shifting. Their territories shrink as humans expand. Climate changes alter their food sources. And occasionally they become curious about us, particularly those who live alone at the edge of their domains." He looked directly at me, his gaze uncomfortably perceptive. "You've been watched for months, Ranger. Your solitary presence was tolerated, even accepted, but when others arrived, they felt threatened," James suggested. "Not threatened," the elder corrected. "Interested. These beings are intelligent, with their own culture, their own purposes. Your friend who takes pictures, they were especially drawn to him." Maya leaned forward urgently. "Is Liam alive? Can we get him back?" "There is a narrow window of time when someone taken by the Skookum might be recovered," Elder Redwing explained. "They exist partially in our world, partially in another dimension of reality. When they take someone across that threshold, the passage can be followed for 3 days. After that—" He shook his head slowly. "How do we follow?" I asked, already calculating that precious hours had been lost. "The ritual requires someone they recognize, someone they've observed and accepted in their territory." His eyes remained on me. "You, Ranger Kohana. You must go alone." James immediately protested. "That's too dangerous. We don't even know if these creatures are benevolent or hostile." "They are neither," Elder Redwing replied calmly. "They simply are, like the mountain, like the storm, natural forces with their own purpose." Despite James's objections and Maya's concerns, I knew what I had to do. If there was any chance of bringing Liam back safely, I had to take it. Elder Redwing provided specific instructions, a mixture of physical preparation and spiritual guidance that merged indigenous wisdom with practical wilderness survival. The search teams were told we had new information suggesting Liam might have traveled north along an unmapped game trail. Most accepted this explanation without question, redirecting their efforts accordingly. Only Sergeant Winters knew the truth of what I was attempting. By mid-morning, I was ready. I carried minimal equipment: water, emergency medical supplies, a knife, and a small pouch of items Elder Redwing had prepared. No weapons, no radio, no technology that might be perceived as threatening. "Follow the signs," the elder instructed as I prepared to leave. Broken branches pointing the way, stones arranged in patterns, stick structures. The Skookum leave markers for their own kind. Learn to see them, and you will find your path. Maya embraced me fiercely. "Bring him back," she whispered, "and come back yourself." James simply gripped my shoulder, his expression conveying everything words could not. I set out alone, heading north along the lakeshore before turning into the dense forest where we had tracked the footprints earlier. The morning was unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of birds and insects subdued. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elder Redwing's guidance proved accurate. Once I learned to see them, the signs were everywhere, subtle but unmistakable markers directing me deeper into wilderness rarely touched by human presence. Twisted branches formed arrows. Rocks stacked in small cairns indicated turns, everything natural yet deliberately placed. The forest changed as I progressed, becoming older, more primeval. Douglas firs and hemlocks gave way to ancient cedar groves, their massive trunks draped in hanging moss. The undergrowth thinned, revealing a forest floor carpeted in ferns and fungal networks that seemed to pulse with their own inner life. Time became fluid, difficult to track. The forest canopy thickened until only occasional shafts of sunlight penetrated to the ground, creating an eternal twilight. I lost track of how far I had traveled or how many hours had passed since leaving the cabin. The first direct sign came in mid-afternoon. A clear footprint pressed into a patch of moss, fresh enough that water was still seeping into the depression. Larger than the tracks we'd documented previously, it conveyed a weight and presence that sent a shiver through me. I was being allowed to follow, permitted to track what should not be tracked. As daylight waned, I reached a natural clearing dominated by a massive, lightning-scarred cedar tree. Its trunk was wide enough that 10 people linking hands could not have encircled it. At its base was an opening, not quite a cave, but a hollow within the living tree, dark and seemingly bottomless. I knew with inexplicable certainty that this was the threshold Elder Redwing had described, the passage between worlds, and somewhere beyond it was Liam. 3 distinct knocks echoed from within the hollow, reverberating through the clearing. A question, a challenge, an invitation. Following the elder's instructions, I responded with the same pattern, striking a small stone against the wood of the ancient tree. The sound seemed pitifully inadequate compared to the powerful resonance that had emerged from within. For several minutes, nothing happened. The forest remained utterly still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows of the hollow. It stood over 8 feet tall, its massive frame covered in dark reddish-brown hair. The face was a strange blend of human and ape-like features, a pronounced brow ridge, deep-set eyes, a flattened nose, and a mouth that seemed capable of both savagery and subtlety. Those eyes fixed on me with unmistakable intelligence, assessing, evaluating. I remained motionless, fighting every instinct to flee. Elder Redwing had been emphatic about this moment. Any show of fear or aggression would end all hope of communication. The creature made a series of sounds, not quite language as I understood it, but patterned vocalizations that clearly conveyed meaning. It gestured toward the hollow, then back at me, questioning my presence, my purpose. Slowly, careful to make no sudden movements, I removed the small pouch Elder Redwing had prepared. Following his instructions, I placed it on the ground before me, then stepped back. The creature approached with surprising grace for its size, movements fluid and controlled. It examined the offering without touching it, a mixture of herbs, tobacco, and small carved stones that held significance in the elder's tradition. After a long moment, it made a different sound, lower, almost musical. Then it reached one massive hand toward me, palm up, fingers partially curled, an invitation, a test, a choice. Everything within me screamed caution, but I recalled Elder Redwing's final words. Trust must be given to be received. I placed my hand in the creature's open palm. Its skin was warm, calloused, surprisingly human despite its massive scale. Fingers gently closed around mine, not restraining, but connecting. Images flooded my mind, not words, but concepts, emotions, memories that weren't my own. I saw forests stretching unbroken across continents, generations of these beings moving through epochs of time, watching as humans spread across their territories. I felt their retreat into the deepest wilderness, their decision to become legend rather than risk open conflict. And I saw Liam, alive but unconscious, lying on a bed of moss within a structure hidden deep beneath ancient roots. The connection broke as suddenly as it had formed. The creature stepped back, regarding me with what seemed almost like respect. Then it turned and re-entered the hollow in the great cedar, pausing at the threshold to look back, clearly indicating I should follow. For a moment I hesitated. To enter would be to leave behind everything familiar, to step into a realm humans weren't meant to understand. There was no guarantee I would ever return. But Liam was there. And somehow, I knew this journey was inevitable, had been approaching since the day I first chose this remote assignment, seeking solitude and purpose in the wilderness. I stepped forward, into the shadow of the ancient tree, across a threshold both physical and metaphysical. The darkness enveloped me, cool and alive with strange energies. The last thing I remember was the sound of wood knocking against wood, 3 distinct beats that seemed to echo through dimensions rather than mere space. What happened in the hours that followed exists in my memory as fragments, dreamlike and resistant to linear description. A vast network of tunnels and chambers beneath the forest floor, illuminated by bioluminescent fungi. A community of the beings, different sizes, ages, some with silver-shot fur indicating great age. Communication through touch, images, emotions rather than words. And finally, Liam, pale but breathing, lying in a chamber lined with soft moss and fragrant herbs. He appeared unharmed but deeply unconscious, as if in a trance or hibernation state. When I reached for him, I met no resistance. Instead, one of the elder creatures approached, placing massive hands on both our heads simultaneously. Another flood of images, Liam wandering sleepwalking to the lake, drawn by their call. Their curiosity about his picture-making devices, their decision to bring him into their realm, not to harm but to understand. Their realization that he could not survive long in their world, that his absence was causing distress among his kind. They were returning him, and allowing us both passage back. The journey out remains even more fragmented in my memory than the journey in. Impressions of movement through darkness, the sensation of ascending, shifting perspectives of time and space. A final message, not in words but in understanding, that we were welcome in these forests, but boundaries must be respected, territories honored. I awoke at dawn, lying beside the still unconscious Liam at the edge of the clearing near my cabin. Search team members spotted us almost immediately, rushing to provide medical assistance. Liam was breathing steadily but remained unresponsive, locked in whatever trance the creatures had induced. The official report listed exposure and exhaustion as the cause of Liam's condition and my disoriented state. Everyone except Maya, James, Elder Redwing, and Sergeant Winters accepted this explanation without question. Search operations were terminated, medical evacuation arranged, statements taken. The bureaucracy of emergency response followed its predictable course. Liam regained consciousness 3 days later in the hospital, with no memory of what had happened after he fell asleep in my cabin that night. Tests showed no physical damage, no explanation for his extended unconsciousness. The doctors called it a medical mystery. We knew better. Maya returned to Quebec with her samples, hair, footprint casts, photographs. She promised to analyze everything with the utmost discretion to protect both the creatures and ourselves from unwanted attention. Liam recovered his characteristic good humor quickly, though something had changed behind his eyes. A new perspective, a deeper awareness of the world's mysteries. James and I returned to our respective ranger stations, forever altered by what we had experienced. He requested transfer to a busier district, uncomfortable with the isolation that had once seemed appealing. I stayed, drawn by a connection to this place I couldn't fully explain even to myself. The knocking continues, usually on moonless nights when the forest is at its most primal. No longer threatening, it feels more like acknowledgement, one sentient being recognizing another across the divide of different evolutionary paths. I've come to understand that my role here is not just to manage this wilderness, but to serve as a kind of ambassador between worlds, to ensure that humans respect the ancient territories and the beings that still claim them. It's a responsibility I never sought but now embrace. Sometimes, on my patrol routes, I find small gifts left where only I would find them. Arrangements of stones, unusually perfect pine cones, once a carved piece of cedar wood depicting a human and a taller figure standing side by side. I leave my own offerings in return: tobacco, honey, small tokens of respect. A dialogue without words, conducted between species that share this forest, but occupy different dimensions of existence within it. The official reports never mentioned Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or Skookum. They speak only of a ranger and his visiting friends, one of whom became temporarily lost in the wilderness. Another incident filed away, explained by rational causes, the greater mystery preserved. But I know the truth. Each night as I sit on my cabin porch watching the mist rise from the lake and listening to the ancient pulses of the forest, I remain aware that I am not alone. I never was, and in that knowledge I have found a strange peace.